that goes there. So in terms of talking about what progressive web apps are, basically they're web applications with superpowers. They're web applications that can be installed into your device. And so they look like and run like a local app. So whether that be a Windows application, whether that be looking like it's a Linux application or an Android application, or maybe in the future an iOS application, that's all the potential, right? The potential is that you can take a web application that you've already built and are already maintaining and turn it into having the same abilities and the same functionality that a native app would have, and be just as fast and just as performant, etc. So there's a bunch of new web APIs that have come out in the last, say, 5 years that previously weren't there because web apps are really seen in this and put into the sandbox of like, here's the things that web apps can do, and they can't do these other things because those would be security issues or privacy issues, etc. So a lot of these APIs, several of them you still can't get access to if you're not installed in the device, but you can get access to all of these if you're installed in the device, depending on the support and depending on what that device supports and what browser they're using and what operating system. But the list of things that you can do now with a PWA, and then this list is growing, include things like offline access. You can make web applications that are usable without having an internet connection. That's huge. That's one of those reasons that if you talk to employers like, well, why do you want an app? I want an app, I want an Android app or an iOS app so that my users can use it offline. That was one of the main reasons, actually, that when the company I was working at, we built our Android app, we had to build it as an Android app because we needed offline access. We didn't have that option in PWA at the time. But now we have, and that would completely change how we built that app because of that offline support now. It also enables the newer feature that's kind of in the works still and is still being standardized. It's something called background sync. And the idea is that even while your app's not running or the user's not visiting your website, it can run code in the background and download files and new articles, etc., even when you're not there, which means that things work a lot better if you have a flaky connection, whether you're on a train or a bus or any other place out in an area where signal is not good or you have to pay for it. It enables you, there's a lot of optimization you can do with how you use the bandwidth by enabling it to download things while you're not using the app. It also enables things like push notifications, because in order to know that there's new data, you have to be able to download that data while the user's not using the app. So all of that stuff is really important and enables a lot of apps, right? If you think about most of your social media apps, they inherently need two things to work. They need to be able to download data in the background and then tell you when there's new data, right? They need to be able to push out what we call push notifications, right? That tells you, hey, there's somebody posted something, somebody made a comment, and that brings you back into the application. So that's one thing that we get now with the PWA that you don't get if you're not a PWA, if that makes sense, right? If you're just writing a regular web application, you don't get access to those push notifications. But that's part of where this, you kind of saw in the reading material, where the service worker comes in. You need that service worker in order to do push notifications. Other things we can do now, we can access the user's local files. So like we can write an app, you write this PWA, you download it onto your computer, and it can actually read and write the files that are on your computer. That enables things like, there's now a version of VS Code that is available online. You don't have to download VS Code to use it. And it can read and write files because it's a PWA, right? So like there's a lot of companies involved in this, and it enables a lot of things. Bluetooth is another one that's out there. You can read and talk to Bluetooth devices. Used to be a thing that you needed a native app for. You don't need that anymore. USB, you can get access to that. You can even use the user's camera to take pictures. You get full control of that through using new web APIs. There's APIs for recording video and recording audio, which also means, we can actually do things like voice calls and things like Zoom and Discord meetings without needing a separate download, right? You can literally do that in a web app today. That's huge, right? Things like that. We've got push notifications, share. There's an API now for sharing stuff. So you find something in this app that you really like or in this website, you can set up a share button and it will go and pop up the usual Android menu of like, hey, do you want to share it in this other app? That used to be something you had to write a native app for. Again, we can do it with a PWA today, right? So there's a lot of things there. Full screen mode is another huge one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This list keeps growing. If you look online, there's so many different APIs that are out there, and it's very clear that that is going to continue to be the trend where, hey, maybe there's something that we can't do in a PWA today, but in 5 years, in the next 5 years, we'll definitely be able to do it, right? So it's something that we really have to keep an eye on and keep watching, because I think more and more apps are going to be able to make that switch. In fact, for most businesses, nearly, I'd say 90% of businesses, it already makes sense to make that switch from a native app to PWA because of the kind of features and the kind of needs that most businesses have, right? Now, some cases where that might not happen, things like games, right? If you're trying to make a video game, you may not want a PWA. It might not be the thing to fit for you. If you're doing a lot with AR and VR, you might still be building a native app, things like that. But the vast majority of applications can now make that switch. And also it's worth mentioning, so these PWAs, I think the lab is going to have you do it with your React application, but you can really do this with any combination of back-end technologies and front-end technologies. If you're building a web app of any sort, or a website, you can make it into a PWA. You can be using PHP on the back end, you could be using something that's a WordPress site. It could be that you're starting off with something that's got Node or Java or C# on the back end. It doesn't matter what Ruby, whatever technology you're using on the back end, you can make it into a PWA. So it's not tied to, like, you have to be building your app with a certain set of technologies, which used to be the case with everything kind of coming prior. You had to use a certain set of technologies and you were kind of locked into those. So for instance, one of those would be like React Native. Like, okay, you can build a React Native app that runs on Android and iPhone, but then you're locked into React Native, right? This is choose what you want on the back end and the front end, and it works and you can use it. So it really, you can use anything. I've used it for an app that was using handlebars and rendered entirely on the back end, but it really works best, I would say, if you have a JavaScript front-end framework. Like, that's the happy place where it works best and is easiest to set up. So that means things like React or Angular or Vue. If you're using that on the front end, it's much, much easier, right? If you're using JavaScript, it becomes much, much easier to make this transition. Do you have a question, Evan?
Not a question as much as kind of just what's going on in my head, which is, when you look at Facebook, currently today, is Facebook the apps, and I say apps, I believe there's a native, they do native Java,
right?
And was it Scratch on the iOS side?
Swift. Yeah, so I believe they've got a Swift app and an Android app built in Java, and they have a web application. Like, they've got 3 different versions of the same applications. Now, that, I think at least historically they have that. I think that actually more than likely they're using React Native for the Android and iOS versions, because React is kind of the thing that they built, right? So I'm guessing that Facebook's using React for their web application and React Native for their Android app and their iOS app. Which means there's
at one point where they were using something like a React Native that would compile into separate apps.
Yeah.
And then they switched that.
Yeah.
So at one point they had one source code for their mobile apps.
Yeah.
And then it would compile into native Java or whatever.
Something like that.
Yeah, the 2 different apps.
Yeah.
And then this might be 10 years ago now, I don't know.
Right.
If memory serves, they said, you know what, no, to leverage all the features that we need and we want, we need to write native apps instead.
Right.
Because we don't have access to a lot of the features that we want.
Yeah.
And this might be going back some time ago.
Yeah. And I don't know where they land.
I don't know where they land today.
They've had, I mean, the Facebook case is they're a very large company. They have a very large software development team, and it kind of makes sense to them to spend a lot of money on it. So that's something for a company of the size of Facebook. They can feasibly maintain 3 different copies of their application, or more if you want to add in a Linux version in there. But for most companies, that's not really feasible, right? For most companies, the large number of companies, they have pretty small developer teams. I mean, if you look at the vast majority of companies, they have 5 developers or less, right? And with a team that small, it's really hard to maintain 3 different versions of an application, right? It's very hard. It can be done, but it is very difficult with a small team to maintain 3 copies of the same software, right? So, this is part of where the PWA comes in. The idea is you build it once, you build this one web application, and it works ideally everywhere, right? We're not there with iOS, so there's been some issues with iOS kind of pushing back, and they haven't added a lot of features. So this PWA isn't fully supported on iOS, but it's there for everybody else, right? Which is really a big deal. Okay.
So I'm just trying to kind of understand, like, what's the difference between like a PWA as opposed to like using something like Electron?
Right. So PWA, you're using entirely web technologies, nothing special. Okay. Electron and React Native have a lot in common. Both Electron and React Native are based in JavaScript. Okay. They're based in JavaScript. Electron gives you a way to write desktop apps using JavaScript, versus React Native is a way to write mobile apps using JavaScript, right? So they're slightly different. One targets desktop and one is targeting mobile. Okay, but other than that, they're very similar, right? So the idea is to get kind of a container that you can do that, but then you have to code against all of the Electron APIs. Does that make sense? You're not coding against standard web technologies that have been agreed upon by many companies, and we've said, this is what we're agreeing on, and we're not going to change it, and there's a huge process, several-year process, if you want to change how that works. Versus if you're going with Electron, well, you're beholden to whatever Electron decides to change. If they decide to change how their API works, you're stuck with that. If there's some bugs and some performance issues with Electron, you're stuck with that. Does that make sense?
So, like, I guess Electron is more of its own standard.
It's its own runtime, right? Its own runtime. So it defines its own APIs for things like this, right? So if I want to access files in Electron, I don't use the standard web API for files. I use the Electron API for files. So it means that I have, like, if I want to build a PWA version of Electron, like, the code is going to be different, right, inherently. It's still JavaScript in both sides, but it's going to be different, right? So that means that you may be able to build most of your code in a way, like, if you push it out to NPM packages, you can probably reuse most of those NPM packages, but there's going to be some layers and some bits that are different from Electron to PWA to React Native, right? There's going to be some parts where those are different, specifically around some of these APIs, like for files and offline access. Cool? Does that help?
Yeah.
So it's part of getting to a standard API that works everywhere and is not in the control of one company. That's part of this goal, right? That's actually one of the things that's brand new and is really the revolutionary thing, is that it's all based on web standards and not based on one particular software framework. Does that make sense? That's really what the game changer is. And that's why I say you can use any set of back-end technologies, any set of front-end technologies. You do need to be using JavaScript somewhere in there, but that can be vanilla JavaScript. You can write PWAs just using vanilla JavaScript. It doesn't have to be any frameworks in there. I would recommend frameworks, but it doesn't have to be. So talking a little bit about a history of PWA, in some ways this feels like a really new thing. I think to most of you and me and Evan, it's something that we really haven't heard about all that much, but really popped onto my radar over the past maybe 2 years from just different stories that I picked up in the tech news site. It's actually a really old thing, and it's been running, and I think that we can trace the history back more than 20 years at this point, in fact. So just a few things to kind of bring up. Now, there's a quote from Bill Gates that I was able to kind of track down, and it actually dates back to the launch of Windows 98. So we're talking about all the way back to 1998. This is something that Bill Gates said when he was demoing and talking about Windows 98 before it was on the market. I wasn't able to track down an audio or a video clip of this, but it's really insightful and it's really interesting. So what he said is, you just learn one thing, and that's the browser. Let's come in talking about Windows 98. All the work that is being done in the future simply takes advantage of the great HTML offerings. Recognize this is 98. HTML is not really that powerful. Great HTML offerings. It's also about ease of use and allowing you to think of offline use of the computer and online use as the same thing. We're talking about 98, but he's really talking about the same idea as PWA, right? Because in Windows 98, what they did was they made the web browser, Internet Explorer, is actually part of the operating system. In fact, your background, your desktop background in Windows 98 is an IE tab. It's basically an IE window. You can run an HTML file and JavaScript in your Windows 98 desktop. Ended up being a really big security problem, but you could do that, right? So this is not necessarily a new thing, but it's something that's a lot of visionaries have kind of seen. It's just taken a long time to get there. Does that make sense? I also want to play a clip here from Steve Jobs. This is dating back to 2007 and when they launched the iPhone. And it's actually pretty interesting to what he saw back then. Now, the audio is pretty low.
One last thing that I wanted to talk about, and that, of course, is the iPhone. The iPhone ships on June 29th. That is just 18 days from today. I believe at 6 p.m. in the evening they will go on sale. June 29th, 18 days from today. Now, what about developers? What about developers? We have been trying to come up with a solution to expand the capabilities of iPhone by letting developers write great apps for it and yet keep the iPhone reliable and secure. And we've come up with a very sweet solution. And let me tell you about it. So, we've got an innovative new way to create applications for mobile devices. Really innovative. And it's all based on the fact that iPhone has the full Safari inside it. The full Safari engine is inside of iPhone. And it gives us tremendous capability, more than has ever been in a mobile device to this date. And so you can write amazing Web 2.0 and Ajax apps that look exactly and behave exactly like apps on the iPhone. And these apps can integrate perfectly with iPhone services. They can make a call. They can send an email. They can look up a location on Google Maps. After you write them, you have instant distribution. You don't have to worry about distribution. Just put them on your internet server. And they're really easy to update. Just change the code on your own server rather than having to go through this really complex update process. And they're secure with the same kind of security you'd use for transactions with Amazon or a bank. And they run securely on the iPhone so that they don't compromise its reliability or security. And guess what? There's no SDK that you need. You've got everything you need if you know how to write apps using the most modern web standards to write amazing apps for the iPhone today. You can go live on June 29th.
So it's kind of ironic. Yeah, it's a really big question. What happened, right? You know, they released the iPhone and Steve Jobs saying, hey, we can build web apps today. Why do you need an SDK to build iPhone apps? Just build web applications. Didn't quite work out as planned. Basically, the web wasn't ready for it, is the short story. Is the web wasn't ready at the time for building web applications. We were missing a lot of things that we didn't realize that we were missing. All of our websites really just weren't built to run on desktops. This is a really new thing to have this was a really new thing to have a full-blown web browser in your pocket, right? That was a brand new thing. We did have things like Blackberries before, but Blackberries had some limited browsers. They were not full-blown browsers, and that's kind of where he's talking about. JavaScript was very limited, still very limited. HTML was limited. CSS was limited. There's a lot of features that we take for granted today that weren't there, and including like the newest stuff, the service worker stuff to do offline access wasn't there. Right? So there's a bunch of stuff that's really needed and we use for building modern responsive apps and things like that weren't really there yet. Okay. So as I understand, I think from reading a little bit of blurb of the history where I pulled this from is that, you know, shortly thereafter they ended up releasing an SDK anyway and Xcode and all the tools to build apps because they're like, well, we can't write web apps today that are fast enough and they're powerful enough and they're featureful enough. So, but things have evolved, right? Does that make sense? So the idea is like, hey, this has been a thing that people have envisioned, major players have envisioned for many, many years, right? This release of the iPhone is 14 years ago now, right? So it's a question of like, well, what happened? We basically weren't ready for it yet. And so that's the process of like, well, how do we, you know, what are the things that we need to teach and what are the things that we need to learn and have available in that, in JavaScript to be able to get there, right? And so like some of the technologies that you've already learned in first semester and third semester, those things didn't exist in 2007, right? And so, but they're important to make this happen. So talking a little bit about history and some of the important things that have occurred, we talk about media queries. Media queries for figuring out what the width of device is. Just one thing you learn in first semester. Say, hey, let's change the CSS if the screen width is bigger than 600 pixels, 900 pixels, 1200 pixels, etc. We didn't have that when the iPhone shipped. Like that came about right around 2007 to support the fact that, oh, shoot, this is a problem, right? I need to have the CSS be way different on an iPhone versus desktop, right? So that's a feature that came out around 2007 as a critical part of making our responsive web design work, right? Media queries, you can't do responsive web design without media queries. Another thing that came out, CSS Flexbox, 2015. 8 years after that. I mean, before this, we were doing stuff. We were trying to do this design with floats, believe it or not. We were trying to use floats up until 2015 to try to do responsive web design, right? Bootstrap 4.0, which has made a lot of this so much easier, That came out into the 2018, right? 2018, that's where it integrated, like Bootstrap 4 said, oh, this thing, Flexbox, let's integrate that and media queries and let's bring all that together and give you some nice utilities for building responsive apps. That really wasn't there until 2018, right? Bootstrap 3 and before were not as good when we talk about doing responsive. That wasn't mainly their focus, right? So that really became Bootstrap's focus in Bootstrap 4. Cool. And you remember all the transitions we had to go from Bootstrap 3 to 4.
It's really weird from my point of view. I've been a teacher during all these years.
Yeah.
I've been teaching since 2006. I was too young when I started, and it's like as a teacher, like we get exposed to this differently than I think we would be in English.
Yeah.
But I all of these things in here obviously were things I've had to learn along the way, and it's pretty cool to see them laid out like this.
Yeah, so it's a lot of it comes together, right? A lot of things. I mean, from our perspective, it's something that I've been watching from our perspective, we've been watching this for 20 years, right? From your perspective, you've been watching it for 2 or 3, right? But from ours, it's huge, right? In fact, we talk about this term responsive web design all the time now. But that only first was introduced in 2010, 3 years after the iPhone launch, right? So that's a relatively new term in our kind of timeline, responsive web design. And in fact, that term was coined before Flexbox, which is so weird, right? The original definition and discussion of this responsive web design came about when we were doing things with media queries and floats, right? Not media queries and Flexbox, which is what we do today, right? And then we've got the term progressive web apps. This finally got coined in 2015, right? So this term's actually been floating out there for like 5 years now, right? Even though it's maybe not something that's come until the modern kind of understanding, I'd say, until 2019. I think 2019 is where really the talk about it really escalated, and a lot more people started discussing it from a lot of different reasons. So there's an article written by a Chrome developer called Alex Russell that really, it was the person behind that term, right? And which points to the fact that actually this is something kind of the progressive web apps is an idea that kind of originated at Google, and they've had a really strong hand in this transition, right? So in fact, the way that if you go to make a progressive web app, part of how it works is it's actually kind of running in Chrome. It's just a Chrome that's headless, as we might say. You can't tell that it's running in Chrome, but it's actually running in Chrome is part of what makes this work. Similar thing, you can actually do PWAs with Firefox. If you install a PWA from Firefox, then it's running in a headless Firefox sort of tab or window. So it's inherently kind of tied to the browser where you install it from. Talking about this, so once that term was coined in 2015, Google really latched onto that and have really taken a strong push in terms of getting PWA to a point where it's like, yes, we want to do this, right? So if you look at the history over the last 5 years, you see a lot of different things that Google has done. It's like, okay, yes, they're pushing this development. They see the benefits of this, and so there's a lot of features and things that they've been a big player behind getting all those APIs that I talked above into the standards. They've been a big voice in that, and I don't think without Google that may not have happened, right? That these APIs became available for the web. There's also some tooling that they've added along the way. So like, I'll show you in Chrome, there's some new Chrome dev tools. There's a new tab that's entirely dedicated to PWA. And I think just last year they added something to Lighthouse that will tell you where, which is a way to kind of measure the performance you're at. It will actually tell you if you've got PWA support enabled. And so those things have happened in recent years. with all of that, 2016, one of the things that Google did is they started giving preferential treatment in their search engine for mobile applications, for mobile web apps. So when Google crawls the internet now, it actually will run it basically in an Android VM first, and it will take that version. It will look at the mobile version, and that's what it indexes and prioritizes. So if you have a desktop version of your app and a mobile version of your app that are hosted on two different domains, the one that Google will spend more time in and put more kind of weight into is to the version that is mobile friendly, right? And so that has encouraged a lot of companies to get onto that responsive web design bandwagon of like, hey, we need to build apps that work on mobile, and we don't want to be building like, here's an app that's like our desktop version of our mobile site and a mobile version of our website, which actually used to be what we did in 2007. We said, okay, there's so limited features that we literally had to build a mobile website and a desktop website as completely separate websites, because the CSS, the breakpoint, we didn't have this idea of like breakpoints and media queries and Flexbox. So you got to a point where we actually have to build two copies of the website, one for desktop and one for mobile, and we can't necessarily do things responsibly.
Yeah, there's even where the URL would be a subdomain. m.google.com would be the how to navigate to the mobile Google or whatever.
I think Facebook was this. Or Facebook.
URL.
Yeah. I think Facebook was like m.facebook.com. Yeah. Right, and sometimes there's also the Mobi extension, so like Facebook.mobi kind of thing. So that was a really big deal, and so Google said, well, we're going to just index the mobile version, which meant that, oh, your desktop version is going to drop down in the search results, so you better fix that. So this PWA thing, remember I said it was kind of designed, and the term was coined in 2015. In 2017, we saw a really big change. Twitter released the PWA. They jumped on this bandwagon and said, oh, this is a great thing. Let's give it a try. And I think I saw something last year, 2020 and 2021, that they'd made some improvements and some adjustments to that. But yeah, so Twitter is now launching. Twitter has a PWA. They have a PWA version of their website. Uber did a similar thing in 2018. Now it's located at m.uber instead of uber.com, but they have a PWA, right? So you see these big companies jumping on this in the past few years. They're like saying, oh, well, this is definitely a good thing. In 2019, we had a really big important thing that happened. And Google said that Google introduced this idea of trusted web activities. And basically, the long story short, it's a way to run Chrome inside your Android app. Full-blown Chrome tab, basically. Which means that, because you now have full access to HTML and CSS and JavaScript and all those things, because you're running Chrome inside your app, actually enables you to ship a PWA as an Android app. Enables you to bundle it up. And that's been the way since 2019, and that's part of where Twitter and this kind of things fits in. You're like, okay, I can make an Android app that's just a thin shell, that's just a wrapper around my web application, and put it in the Play Store, right? Because prior to 2019, you couldn't put your PWAs in the Play Store at all, right? There really wasn't a good way to do it, if that makes sense. So that's really made a difference. This is a little bit hard, as I understand it, to use directly. So there's some tools that Google's recently put out to make this easier. So for instance, actually, just last year, 2021, Google had a little talk at Google I/O, which is their main convention they have regularly. And there's a talk where they talk about a new tool called Bubble Wrap, I think it is. Let me see if I can pull up the link. So there it is, Bubble Wrap. So you can run this command, bubble wrap, knit, manifest, blah 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 blah, and it will take your manifest that you have, it take your files for your PWA, and generate an entire Android project that wraps that PWA. So that you can take that generated Android Studio project, publish it on the Play Store, like a regular Java app, even though most of the code is written in JavaScript and hosted online.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question, Bonnie.
Go for it.
That's all right.
Go for it.
So I want to understand kind of big picture here. Native apps, we've got Java.
Yep.
For Android.
Yep.
And we've got Swift
for
C
Objective-C.
Objective-C.
/ Objective-C.
For iOS.
Yep.
So you want to build, historically, you want access to all the phone's features, you got to build native.
Right. Yes.
Right. If you want access to all the push notifications and offline access. And
right. And for Windows, that would be C#. So C# for Windows. Or
are there even Windows phones anymore?
We're talking about desktop apps. If you wanted to build desktop apps,
yeah,
you needed to build them in C#. But it's
right.
not. So it's not just.
But Android. We're talking mobile apps, right. Native to Android, native to iOS,
native to Windows.
There was a Windows phone. I thought that's what you were saying. You're saying
native Windows desktop.
Okay, desktop.
You basically largely built them in C#.
Then they started coming out with these libraries, as Brandon mentioned, and it was hey, I want to with the language I know.
Right.
I want to write the language once and have it compiled down to be supported in both Android and iOS. So these are the native languages.
Right.
And then there's another. These are out there, but then there's another segment, which is write once. I don't know what you call this. Write once.
Run everywhere.
Run everywhere.
Yep. Which was the key selling point when Java came out. That's what Java sold.
Yeah, write once, run everywhere. And some of these, and they're out there today, and people use them, are React Native. And so React Native is a flavor of JavaScript, you would say.
It is JavaScript.
It's JavaScript.
It's just in a different runtime environment.
Yeah.
Right. So the runtime environment for React Native isn't say Node. It's not say it's the React Native runtime environment.
And by everywhere we mean iOS and Android. There's another one in C#. I can't think of the darn name right now. Write once, run everywhere. You build the app in C# and it compiles into both iOS and Android. It's called. What is it called?
.NET, I think.
Well,
the .NET framework's not.
can I browse real quick?
Yeah. See if we can find it.
So C#. Okay, C# for mobile apps.
Oh, okay.
Development, and it is Xamarin. There it is.
Oh, Xamarin, yeah.
Xamarin.
Yeah, so that's another competitor.
Okay, so React Native, the idea of you write JavaScript and it'll compile into both iOS.
You write React specifically.
You specifically write React, yeah.
React.
Xamarin is kind of like this idea of hey, C#, let's leverage that knowledge. And it'll compile into both iOS and Android. And now what Mr. Smith is saying, this is a specific way of writing JavaScript.
Right.
This is a specific tool set that you have to use with C#.
And both of these are limited to the APIs that they can get access to. They actually neither of these get access to the entire native APIs. They're limited to what you can get access to.
There's teams of people making React Native,
right?
So their toolkit is more limited.
Right.
Their toolkit is more limited.
And so you can only get to the things that they have given you access to and they have built support for.
And so in this now, we have PWAs.
Right.
It's in this list of write once, run everywhere. This would you agree, my assessment of my understanding so far, that the problem is with PWAs is that they're not quite yet on iOS.
They're not quite yet on OS.
But the prediction is,
I think they're going to be there.
we think they're going to be
years.
Okay.
And even if they're not there on iOS, they're still working for everything else, right? They're still working and working well on Windows and Linux and Android. Even if they're not working on iOS, it's still worth building a PWA and then building a native app for iOS. That's where people are at.
And so the big benefit to this is truly, would you say, either open source?
Truly open source.
It's more open. It's more open.
Yeah.
Right? Here you're limited to the tools they give you.
Right.
Here you're limited to the tools they give you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just like, hey, any web API standard you can use.
You're limited only to what the browser can do. You're limited only to what the browser is currently capable of doing and what the user gives you permission to do.
I'm sure there's other tools out here.
Yeah.
This seems very powerful because of this.
Right. Yeah. That and alone, and the fact that it's not tied to a specific technology is tremendous. Yeah. Right. And one of the things I may have mentioned here, the assumption right now is that you write these primarily in JavaScript. At least the front end is going to be written primarily in JavaScript and HTML. That may or may not be the future, because there's also something out there called Webassembly. And so the Webassembly project is working towards allowing you to take any language and basically compile it to JavaScript. Or compile it into even a more optimized version of WebAssembly that is even faster than JavaScript. So actually there's work happening there right now where you can write code in C++ and ship it and run it on your website. Like, that is happening. And there are some websites that do a lot of 3D rendering that are using that to leverage, like, okay, I can write even faster code. So the potential where this is going is you could actually write any language as that WebAssembly project continues and there becomes more support for WebAssembly. You can write literally any language you want and ship it as a PWA on the front end and both the back end.
What other tools are out there besides React and Xamarin? Anything jump out at you? What are the big ones that
For game development, there's one called Unity. That's the dominant one.
Unity goes into both iOS.
Yep, it goes into all of them. So if you're building a game, you can build it in Unity, which is currently C#, and you can run it on every operating system. You can build a game in Unity, and it'll run on iOS, and it'll run on Android, it'll run on Windows, and it'll even run on things like the Switch, the Nintendo Switch.
What are some big games built in Unity?
Way more than I can count. Okay. Way more than I can count. Basically, more than 50% of the game market right now is built in Unity, shorthand. So it's a very dominant, and there's been a lot of big names that have been built in Unity. You don't always know because there's not always a Unity logo on it. So, yeah, so that's one option in the game development world. And that's basically like, well, if you're doing game dev, just use Unity, forget about this PWA thing because that's the tool you want.
I remember a transition from Xhtml to HTML5.
Yes.
And I remember in this transition around the 2010 time, people were saying this a lot. They would say, look, if you can write HTML5, you can build all that.
Right.
And I never realized kind of how that could really be true.
Right.
Until literally having this conversation with Mr. Smith.
Right. Yeah, it's happening.
HTML5 is CSS. It's a lot of JavaScript.
Right.
But you don't have to know C#. You don't have to know React.
Right.
You just know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Right. You have to know those technologies. And as I was saying, the other thing on the WebAssembly side is it used to be like JavaScript's getting much faster. It's much, much faster than it was 10, 20 years ago, and much more performant. But for some applications, it's still too slow. WebAssembly is pushing that boundary where we're now writing things in C and C++ and Rust, which are taking maximum use of the performance of the CPU and the memory, and doing the things that you needed a native app to do on the web, right? And WebAssembly is really breaking down that boundary of things that are too slow to be written in JavaScript. So that's happening as well, right? And that's important. That's important. You know, it's important to be able to write things fast, because for some applications that does matter, right? For games and for other things that are doing 3D rendering, that really does matter, that you can write things in some of those other languages other than JavaScript. Cool. Yeah, so it's a big thing there. Talking a little bit about other apps that have shipped. YouTube, Google itself has been involved in this process. So they've been slowly upgrading their applications, all of their whole suite of tools, to PWAs. Like, so in 2019, YouTube Music went to, it's now available as a PWA. You can literally go to the website and install it as an app. 2020, YouTube TV, and then just last year, we finally got YouTube as a PWA. And what I mean by that is if we go to YouTube, there's this little icon up in the bar. You see this? Install YouTube. If I click install here, I now have YouTube on my computer as if it were a native app. It's that simple. Little download icon in the search bar.
But that's there for everybody?
This. If you're using Chrome, it's there. Yeah. Anything that's based on, yeah. That icon is there new, and it just appeared last year. You can see how easy it is to miss.
Yeah.
But that's a big deal, right? That's a big deal that Google would put their money and their backing behind and say, hey, we're going to do this with our own applications, right? We're going to start shipping our own applications as PWAs.
Yeah. And just for me, I've always considered myself a Google fanboy. I've always liked Google product line.
Yeah.
So this makes me kind of want to study this even more because I just like what they support.
Yeah. So, I mean, Google's absolutely behind this. I mean, we're working with all the other makers, right? You know, but they're the big one driving this.
I understand like what they're doing, but is anyone doing anything to make this known to people like outside the industry?
So that's a really good question, and I think that outside of the developer industry, that message really hasn't gone out, right? I don't think that has happened as well as it should have. I think that Twitter has done a little bit of that work to try and tell people about their PWA, but they haven't necessarily. I mean, they've shouted it and they've made, like, there's posts on the Twitter feed talking about their PWA, but yeah, it's not as well known to people that are kind of outside of that developer knowledge. But it's also just a matter of worth knowing, like, I mean, 2019 is, I think, really when this started taking off, right? I think before 2019, it's a really, really small number of companies that really even knew about it and were aware of it, right? Were really paying attention to it. So I think that it's really only come to most developers' attention in the past 2 years in a big way. So,
if you had to guess in 10 years, the industry standards would be around this.
I think so. I think in even the next 5 years, that it doesn't make sense to build native applications. I think it makes sense to do this because of all the benefits and all the reasons behind it, right?
I realize the prediction market is a hard market to be in.
Yeah.
I don't like predictions.
But I think, yes, easily within the next 10 years. I mean, we don't know, but I think that this is a case where we talk about JavaScript's eating the world. JavaScript is literally eating the world. And if PWA works and takes off and everybody gets on board with it, which is happening, then JavaScript eats the world, right? And that's that becomes the one language to write applications everywhere, right? which is kind of where we're at today, right? You know, with the combination of Electron for desktop apps and React Native for that, you know, that's absolutely happening. PWA just makes that easier. So, yeah, in 2021, I mentioned this just last year. Google shipped this bubble wrap thing, so you can literally take your PWA, run this little tool. It's worth noticing here that this is npm install -d bubble wrap should look familiar to all of my third semester students. Go to npm, no package manager, install package, install it globally. It's a CLI tool. There's no package. Wow. Okay, so I can install it globally and then run it, or I could just use npx bubble wrap today and go, hey, we've got an Android Studio project, right? And that way I can list it. I can actually put it on the Play Store. I can take the PWA. Not only can I have them install it from my website, but I can also have them install it from the Play Store, right? And you get the benefit of all that traction, if you want that traction, right? If you even want that traction. But that's huge. Because it was the purvey up until, you know, 2019 that if you wanted to put something on the Play Store, you had to write it in Java or Kotlin. But you don't have to write it in Java and Kotlin really anymore, right? To write effectively a native app. So some just success stories here in terms of companies that put this into play. These are numbers that these companies have released. So Twitter said that by going to PWA, they cut it down by 70%. The amount of bandwidth data that their app consumes. Like their PWA consumes a lot less data than I think I'm assuming that's compared to their native application, right? Because of the tools that are available there. So they've cut that by 70%. Alibaba's increased the number of people that basically check out. AliExpress, more time, you know, I guess less time spent finding.
You know what Alibaba is? That's the Chinese Amazon, eBay,
Yes.
PayPal. It's like the Chinese.
They're on this and they have a PWA. Same for AliExpress. They have a PWA, right? Washington Post actually made their app faster by going with PWA. I don't know who some of these other parts are. Supposedly Flipkart was the first one to jump onto here in terms of engagement and revenue from Best Western, etc. So you're seeing, you know, companies that are making more money using less bandwidth and writing apps that run faster using PWA. Wow. So some just general benefits talking about PWA. We talked about some of these already. Part of this idea of run once, run everywhere, right? You can write literally a web application and run it on any device, which kind of is important because typically, regardless of what business you're building in, has to basically build a web app anyway. It's very rare that you can build just a mobile app and not build a web app. It's very rare that companies can benefit from that, right? If you talk about any of the major companies, Amazon, Target, Walmart, if they just shipped an app, right, they can't just ship an app. You have to build a web app because that's how users find you first, right? Large in part, most users are going to go through Google and they're going to find your web application or your website first rather than going the other way around, right? For some companies, that's the reverse. You might find you on the Play Store first and then find your website. But for most companies, especially small businesses, you know, you're talking about largely them having, let's say, a restaurant. Restaurant has a website, and they're going to have a website first, right? Rather than having an app first, right? So be able to take that, and we're really talking about one code base to roam on, one code base for everywhere, right? So you literally write a web application that runs in all of these different places rather than writing a web application plus a React Native app, or a web application plus Electron, web application plus Xamarin.
We appreciate the Lord of the Rings reference. I don't know if you can help with that, but I appreciate that.
Right. It's really this idea that you can write one Git repository, and that's the code that runs on the front end everywhere, right? Rather than writing, here's a GitHub repository for this version, here's a GitHub repository, like for Android, here's a GitHub repository for iOS, here's a GitHub repository for React, etc., etc., etc. Right? You write it once. You're using standardized web technologies. All these things have, been hammered out over years. That multiple companies have had a voice in, and anytime something changes, it's not just like one company, one developer decides to rename their variable to something else or the name to something else. It's got to go through the standards body, these W3C, etc., that take years to go look at every change and say, well, we don't want to break anybody, right? We don't want to make the applications on the web break. So it's very rare that things happen where we change things that are breaking change, right? How long has the source attribute, right, on images been, that's how you say where the URL of the image is. It's been that way forever. That hasn't changed, right? With the standards body, how likely is it that W3C is going to say, okay, let's call that image instead of source? They're not going to say okay with that. But if you go to, say, Google's done a lot of things like that, right? And same thing with Apple, where it's like, oh, well, and Microsoft, well, we'll change the name in this version. So it's not this name anymore, it's this name now. Or don't use this thing anymore. Like with Android, don't use the support libraries. Use Jetpack instead, right? A lot of those things have happened because one company had control of it, and oftentimes it came down to one developer, right? In fact, honestly, I love Bootstrap, but the changes they made from Bootstrap 4 to Bootstrap 5 kind of kill me. It's like, this is not backwards compatible. If you try to go from Bootstrap 3 to 4 or 4 to 5, your entire website breaks, right? But that's not the standard with most, these web technologies like HTML and CSS and JavaScript, right? So that's huge, right? You're working against these standard web technologies, and they're not like controlled by a single company.
I'm looking at it. I got a comment.
Yeah, that's fine. So another side of things is there's a vast array of free and open source libraries out there, and you get access to all of them, right? You're building in JavaScript, you get the entire NPM repository for that, which right now is close to 2 million packages, right? Close to 2 million packages. It's just under, I think it's 1.8 million, I think last I checked, 1.8 million. But you get all those 1.8 million packages, you can use them and you can remix them and make your own version, and it just works, right? It works with it as long as you're using anything powered by Node, right? Anything that's JavaScript. So you get that huge array of packages, which is way different. It dwarfs anything in the NuGet repository, which is for C# or any other repositories you find for other languages. Gradle is the one that we use for building Android apps. It's huge and it's searchable, right? And it's actually so easy to deploy, make new packages on NPM. I've built 5+ myself, right? So that's huge, right? That it's the barrier entry to releasing open source software is so small, you can bring all that in. We also talked about backwards compatibility. Backwards compatibility here is great. I'd say that with web technologies, they have the best track record for being backwards compatible, right? You talk about, if you go out there and look online and you look for websites that have been developed on the 90s, most of them are not live anymore, but they still run. If you can find one that was built and written in the 90s and they haven't changed a line of code since 1995, it will still run in Chrome today. That's not true with any Android app on the market. If you wrote an app for any version of Android, it does. I can guarantee you that some part of it is broken today. Some part of it doesn't work with the modern Android ecosystem because things have changed so much. And in fact, things changed so much and broke so much between version 1 and version 5. So that's huge. We're also talking about this idea of progressive enhancement. And so the way in the terminology, the way things work is that as you're adding these new features, you can set up the app in such a way that, okay, here's the basic version that you get if you're just using it on the web. You install it. Okay, you get some more functionality, right? Okay, your browser supports this more functionality, so we'll give you that functionality, but we won't give it to people that don't have support for that. All of that's great, and it's really easy to implement. And there's permissions. So let's say, hey, if you want to access local files, you give the user permission to do that, and then you get it. So the whole idea is you start with this, like, here's the minimal sets of things that you can do in functionality, and the user, and you can progress that, and you can add more features as the device has support for those features, or the user gives you permission to them, right? Which is huge, right? You know, you can start with an app that and grow it and really handle whether or not those features are supported, and do that really elegantly. Most technologies, I think even Android hasn't done it as well as the web technologies has, as JavaScript has. Make sense? As largely in part, it's just an if statement. You just say, hey, does this thing have this property? Okay, great, let's go do this thing, right? Checking if there's local storage in JavaScript. Anybody know how simple that is? How do you check for local storage?
So it's local storage.
Yeah, literally, right? So if I want to know if a feature like local storage is enabled, all I do is if window dot local storage, okay, I can do one thing if they have local storage, and I can do another thing if they don't. It's that simple, right? So that's what the progressive enhancement really works around, right? Is that these options are pretty much, when you're dealing with JavaScript, all these APIs, all the new APIs that have been added and have been growing, largely the checks are just as simple as that, okay? Do this if they have the feature, do this if they don't. So that's huge. We've got offline support in there. Updates are tremendously easy because you literally just deploy new changes and the user gets them, right? Like I showed you how to do things with Heroku. You commit things through GitHub, they're up there on the web, their app's updated. That's huge, right? When we talk about doing things on the Android, we get things on the Play Store, I have to do a build, I have to sign it, I have to push it up to the Play Store. The Play Store has to approve it and say, yes, it's good and high quality. They may come back with some changes. I have to go do those changes, run it through my testing, all of those things again, and then maybe eventually it gets released onto the Play Store where everybody can see it. But the process of going from I made a change to getting it on the Play Store, a week if you're lucky, a month more than likely from making the change to getting it out there. Versus this is like, oh, I commit, the app's updated. That's huge, right? There are much fewer barriers to making a fix and making a patch and making an update.
How many people know people who don't update their phones? They got all the apps and 300 downloads and whatever. They just never update it. Right. Well, what comes along with those updates? Security, speed, features,
etc.
etc., etc.
Yeah.
So you take the control out of the end user's hand. You just say, nope, you did this.
And it literally updates just happen the next time you run the app. You run the app, it goes and downloads the new service worker, the new files, and they're running with the new files. They didn't even know, largely part, they didn't even know that it updated. Because most of the times with the PWA, you can make those updates so small, happens in a blink of an eye. Because those JavaScript files are so small, they're so tiny. And you can pick and choose when you download bigger files, like images and video and audio, you can download them as you need them, right? So that's a big deal. Content's always fresh because you're working with those web technologies, right? So it's really easy to go pull down a new image file, a new JavaScript file. You don't have to. If I want to change a single line of Java code in my Android application, guess what? I've got to do a brand new build, push it out to the App Store, get it approved, etc. So to change one line of Java code, I have to ship a brand new app, right? I don't have to do that with a web application. I ship one line of JavaScript code. All I got to do is get it onto the internet and follow my processes. So as I said, several companies have seen better performance, reduced data consumption, as well as increased revenue. Two additional side things to mention, which are really important because some things happened in 2020 and 2021. So in recent memory, it might jog some few eyes. One of the things that this means, because they're downloading the app from your website, it means that all these different platforms can't decide to remove your app or ban you, because that does happen. Apps do get removed and banned from the Play Store all the time. Same thing with the App Store. And sometimes it's fickle, sometimes it's not for good reasons, sometimes it is for good reasons, and sometimes it's just for, hey, Google, Android, the Apple team looked at your thing and said, oh, these images are low resolution, right? We need higher resolution copies of your images, and if you don't do this, then you can't be there, or other reasons it may be, right? In fact, there's if you look at the Reddit channels for Google and Android developers, you'll find that there's regularly, at least once a month, somebody posting on there saying, hey, my Android account got banned. And sometimes it's not for any fault of their own. Sometimes it's because, hey, there's automated systems that Google has to determine which things might be malicious, and sometimes it unfortunately flags people and developers that aren't malicious and removes them, right? So having a web application removes you from that risk. Does that make sense? Right? It means that you're still getting revenue and you can't be removed. If nothing else, you have a fallback because they can always use your web application. You're never in that place where they can just say, oh, well, you can't sell your Android app on the Play Store, right? All your work's for naught because you're banned, right? Similarly thing, all of these different app stores, both the Play Store and the Apple App Store, Amazon has an app store as well, Steam for games, Epic, all of these take roughly a 30% cut of your revenue. It's baked into the contract, right? So whatever they pay you, whether to buy your app, buy your game, or to or any in-app purchases that you do, you have to pay them 30%. You don't pay them that 30% of in-app purchases, you get removed. So you're losing 30% of your revenue, your company's revenue, just by being on their platform, right? And right now, as it stands, there's not really a way around that, except that if you build a PWA, you get to keep all that, right? If you're not on the App Store, you're not on the Play Store, you don't have to pay Google 30% of your money, right? So that's huge, right? You had something you were waiting. You said up ahead? Okay. What was it related to? You said what? Oh, yeah. So that's a huge deal. So just some recent news stories. Everybody, who here has heard about Fortnite and the Fortnite versus, the Epic versus Apple battle, right? Really big deal, right? If you haven't heard about it, Fortnite got removed from both the Apple Play Store and the Google Play Store because of their own actions. So what they did is they put a system into their game or external to it where you could pay for basically in-game currency, not using the Google payment system and not using Apple's payment system, so that they could get 100% of the money and not pay Google or Apple 30%. Because they did that.
One, two,
yeah. So because of that, they got removed, and they've been fighting that battle in court for the past 2 years. long story short, I think they're still in limbo. I don't think that they've been re-added or given permission to be back on the stores. You got a hand up? Oh, okay. So there's a video in here. It kind of talks about that, but just last year we finally got a judgment. So the judge ruled that, I think this is a Supreme Court judge, ruled that Apple has to allow any application on the App Store to allow links and buttons that lead your players to external payment options. That has to be allowed, which means that you can't necessarily you still are not allowed to build the system for them to pay in game, but you can direct them off of your app to another website where they can pay. And then, well, Apple doesn't get that 30% cut. So that's one thing that's happened. They haven't fully won what they were going for, but some things are starting to change, right? Some things in terms of the legal sphere are starting to push against the idea that Apple should get 30% of all of your revenue, right? So some of those things are happening. There's actually a really good audio here I do want to play from NPR that talks about it. It's about 3 minutes in length.
On your iPhone, Apple is taking.
Let me see. Is that from the beginning?
Is taking a 30% cut. It's sort of invisible, but it's happening. And the judge.
Within them, a federal judge has ruled on the case, and Epic Games, the maker of the video game Fortnite, and Apple have been locked in a legal battle. Epic sued Apple over some of its App Store policies. You see, Apple charges developers like Epic a fee every time someone downloads their apps or buys something within them. A federal judge has ruled on the case and largely said Apple's actions were just fine, with one critical exception. NPR's Bobby Allen joins us now to explain, and we should note Apple is among NPR's financial supporters. Hey, Bobby.
Hey there, Elsa.
All right, so can you just break down exactly what this ruling said?
Yeah, so Apple, of course, as we all know, makes a lot of money by selling computers, phones, and other physical stuff. But as iPhone sales flatline, Apple is trying to make a lot more money off things like fees and subscriptions. And on iPhones and iPads, that's big business. I mean, the mobile gaming market alone is a $100 billion industry. So every time you use Candy Crush, say, or you want to buy a cool outfit for your avatar on Roblox, whatever you're doing on your iPhone, Apple is taking a 30% cut. It's sort of invisible, but it's happening. And the judge here said Apple is making money there, but that, quote, success is not a crime. But the judge did say Apple needs to give people options before they buy that outfit on Roblox. So that could look like, do you want to buy it through Apple or do you want to use Roblox's own processor? And it's a subtle thing, Elsa, but it's actually a really big deal.
Right. Okay, tell us a little more about that. Like, what makes it such a big deal?
Right. So let me just use a personal example. So I'm training for a marathon now, and every time I go on a run, I use the app Strava to record my runs, right?
Yep.
I think I pay like $5 a month for a fancier version of the app. Baked into that price is Apple's 30% commission. Now, the judge in this case, Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers, basically said, before I buy that Strava subscription, I shouldn't be forced to complete my payment through Apple. Strava should be giving me more options here. And if I did have an option, say, to process it through Strava, it might be cheaper to me, and Strava might make more money off it. And for years, developers, if they had one complaint about Apple, it's that the App Store is just too tightly controlled by Apple. And, Stanford law professor Mark Lemley told me Apple giving up even a little bit of its gatekeeper role here means there might be more to come.
Big tech has come under a lot of antitrust scrutiny in the last several years, but Apple has so far mostly gotten a pass. And I think this suit, even the way it resolves, is maybe an indication that that's not going to continue.
Interesting. Okay, Bobby, so what happens next in this case?
You can probably guess an appeals process, but the battle lines are actually kind of interesting because both sides are appealing. Nobody here is happy. Epic is appealing because Apple was not declared an illegal monopoly as they had hoped. And Apple is appealing because they don't want to make the changes to its payment system that the judge is ordering. They're really holding on tight to its 30% arrangement.
Okay, so any changes will have to wait on those appeals. But if this ruling does stand, will iPhone and iPad users notice anything different?
Yeah. So in theory, yes. If there are more payment options, Elsa, for you and I, every time we buy something on our iPhone or our iPad, prices could get cheaper. Anna, let's say those lower prices could also force Apple to drop its commission just to stay competitive, right? That's how markets work. But also, developers could just pocket the extra money. So we shall see. We don't know yet for sure how it's going to play out for consumers, but the most optimistic take is if this does survive the appeals process, yes, this could mean consumers will save a little bit of money when you're buying things in Apple's App Store.
That is NPR's Bobby Allen. Thank you, Bobby.
Thanks, Elsa.
So that's a big deal, right? In terms of things that are happening there. And yeah, PWA is one way potentially around that and for that to change.
So what keeps developers from just feeling like, hey, doing purchases, go to this website? Is it like a kind of easy?
So actually, literally, Apple, up until last year, had a literal clause in their legal terminology that if you did that, if you said, go to another website to pay to do this payment, they would remove your app from the Play Store, which is exactly what happened to Fortnite, because they did that. They said, use this other system to pay for gift cards or whatnot, and they got removed because of that. So it's because Apple defined that term.
Yeah, so when that means they just like are they about to like purposely wrong
Yeah. Epic knew that they were going to get legal trouble from this. It's very clear.
But they want to try
Yeah.
to make the change.
Yeah. So they knew the repercussion. Epic knew that they were going to potentially get removed from the Apple Store for doing this, and they decided to do it anyway because they have enough money. And they do. If it goes their way, they stand to make a bunch more money, right? So, but it does affect everybody, right? However, that whatever those courts decide doesn't just affect Apple and Mac. It's going to develop anybody that's potentially building mobile applications.
And I don't know. I mean, every young kid that I know plays phone, and so maybe that's just a function of the young kids that I know. But
they're huge. They're huge.
So I think they're like an entire Apple app.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's like the ran up on stage.
Right.
The Fortnite characters ran up on stage.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you remember right, like let's say on Windows, where do you usually get your games? You get your games from Steam or Epic, right?
Yeah.
They're taking 30% from their developers, right? So if something changes here, this is very well could affect the games you buy on Steam.
That's kind of a weird catch-22 because Epic is right. They stand to win and they stand to win.
Yeah, they're in a very weird position there because they're also not only are they a user on Apple's platform, they have their own platform,
right?
Their own Epic Games platform. So they're actually playing both sides of this arrangement.
Yeah, they must stand to make more money, way more money over here than lose over there.
Yeah.
Fortnite carries.
Yeah. I think that's true, that they're making a lot more money from Fortnite than they're making from their own game store.
Well, I mean, you can get a lot of the things on Steam. It's just like people don't like having a bunch of walkers.
Yeah, I do still prefer to get my games from Steam, but I will get the weekly free games that they have. But I purchased Borderlands 3 as a pre-order, and I would assume that I was going to get that through Steam. I actually ended up getting that through Epic. So I actually have Borderlands 3 through Epic instead of Steam. Yeah. So there's a lot of big games on their on their list, and yeah, they're in a very interesting place. But for us, it's like, where does that fit, right? And again, if you're building a PWA, That's one big advantage. You just get that 30% money. You can potentially pocket that, or you're probably going to still have to pay some money to a payment processor like Stripe or Visa, but it's going to be at a lower percentage, right? They're probably not going to take 30% to do your payment processing. So,
so you could, not related.
Right.
So you mentioned Visa and MasterCard, and they take 2% every time you run that card. They've got a big monopoly on that.
That's huge.
And there are companies, technologies trying to disrupt that payment system, that monopoly of MasterCard and Visa.
But PWA stands to disrupt both of those, right? Because you're off the Play Store, right? So the Play Store isn't getting a cut. And you have the option to use any payment processor you want. So you can pay Visa, or you can pay whatever payment processor that comes along that only charges you 1%, right? You're not locked into a payment processor that way. Versus on the Android, the Play Store, you're locked into both a payment processor and a publisher, and etc. If you want to get your game seen and marketed on the Play Store, you've got to pay Google, right, to run ads, right? So you're also talking about your marketing thing there. Another thing that's worth mentioning, last year you might have heard about an app called Parler. I don't agree at all with what they were doing, but they got removed. They got banned. They actually got banned from every single app store out there. They got completely deplatformed. They got removed from. It was a political thing, right? This goes back down to.
Amazon did like something with like those like servers and stuff.
Yeah. I think actually they got removed from AWS, in fact, right?
Well, it's kind of similar, like when people were taken down.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a big deal, right? So there's not just the question of like who has control over like what cut are they taking, but who has control to take your website down, to take your application down. So what? Yeah, free speech.
Parler was taken down because of what they were saying.
Right, because what they were allowing, right?
Because of like the private company aspect, where other private companies are allowed to do what they want.
Right. And so if you're building a PWA, you are completely in control of your own fate. You're completely in control of your own fate. Google can't just come in and say your PWA is gone.
PWAs, you can get them on the Google Play Store.
Yes. They don't have to be. You can, and then Google does exercise. If you put them on the Play Store, they do exercise both of those. They exercise the right to take it down as well as the right to take 30%.
Yeah.
But you don't have to.
You don't have to.
Right?
They can go to your website and install it via the button.
Right. So that means if things sort of happen politically, let's say, hey, you've got an app where a lot of political stuff is happening and you're running in, say, Iraq or Afghanistan, and you want to get that out there, well, they can't just go at, whatever company or whatever Play Store and App Store and tell them to remove it or take it down, right?
Is there sort of like vetting process that Android Apple does to make sure that like you're not just putting like
Yes, there are vetting processes on both sides. They are both there for good reasons, but also can be very fickle. So I know from one person locally that was trying to get a game onto Apple. They got denied because their art was low quality. It didn't work on both the tablets as well as the iPhones. So they had to completely redo all of their artwork to get it onto that store.
And Apple has a higher standard than Google, right?
Yeah, they do.
To get an app on the Apple Store, it's a higher standard.
Yes, it is a higher standard. It is a higher standard, but they do both exercise editorial license where they can choose, they can look at your app and they review it, and if it doesn't pass the review process, it doesn't get published.
But also, to kind of go down this a little bit more, so
Right.
like you do something terrible, let's just use
Right.
a terrible example like child pornography,
Right.
and you make a PWA around this terrible
Right.
concept, you can still get taken down by AWS.
Right. Yeah, you could still be taken down by AWS and all those kind of things, and you're still gonna, like, in that case, like, federal government's still gonna come after you regardless of where you host it, right? Because there's legal stuff where that is just straight up
So there's still
legal.
is censorship. It's just not Google censorship, Apple censorship. This is government censorship.
Exactly. So it's censorship that's run by governments that can still happen, but it gets you out of censorship that is controlled by some of the big technology companies.
So, like, obviously, I'm not really seeing too many cons of PWAs. My only concern would be, like, is there security concerns where, like, there's a nefarious app where, you know, or something like that?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that the security concerns, as far as I see them, are the same between something being released on the Play Store versus something released as a PWA. But I think that, you know, it's a good question. But I think the concerns on both sides are very similar.
Well, my concern is it's not supported by Apple. That's,
Right.
As much as we see the trend.
Right. That is a trend. That is a problem.
It seems likely.
Right.
But I mean, if you're just choosing today
Mm-hmm.
between React Native,
right,
and PWAs, today, if there was no future,
right,
I would say choose React Native because you write it once and it goes into both.
Right. Except that you still have to write it again to make the web application.
That's a great point.
Because the React Native can't build the web app. So you're still building two different versions.
There you go.
Right. And I think actually where people are landing today, from what I hear, I think actually where people are doing is they're building a PWA for Android and Windows, the browser for the web and Android, and then they're building a React Native just for iOS. Not even necessarily going native Swift for that. So that's the transition path right now. Is it's actually easier to do that than to do the other route potentially. Yeah. So all of that's to kind of explain why this is such a big deal. Yeah. There are a lot of benefits, and the amount of cons out there, there's the iOS question, but there are very little in the way of cons. I think actually the biggest con right now is it's hard to know. Users don't know that they can install it. I think in my head, that's actually the biggest con, is that users don't know how to install a PWA. Like, the icon is there in the status bar. If you go on Android, a little pop-up shows up at the bottom of the screen. But large in part, users are not aware of that that's a thing, right? You can be using Twitter and not be aware that, oh, I can install that, right? I can be using YouTube and not be aware that, oh, I can just install it from YouTube.com, right? I think that's the biggest negative, honestly, that I see. But that's really the way I get around that. It's like, well, okay, if I can publish it to the Play Store, then that's eliminated, right? Because they can find it, even if they don't know to install it from Chrome, they know to go to the Play Store and look for it there, right? So that's kind of the way I see that, if that makes sense. So to look at some examples, we kind of looked at already some stuff there, but I wanted to show two applications that I've kind of built already. So I'm going to link this one in Discord. This was actually the first one that I did to kind of play around with this PWA. It's not actually built in React. It's worth mentioning. Like, this is not built in React. It is built in Node, but the front end is actually raw, plain HTML that's being shipped. So this is what you call server-side rendered sort of stuff. If I look here, as I said, the way that this shows up, let me kind of show. So there's the button, right? So you click that button. I'm going to say install, okay? And now it's running as a native Windows app. Right? It's actually that simple on Windows. I can do a similar thing. Let me just show you what this looks like on Android. I'm going to open it up in my browser. And on your browser, it'll pop up like a little pop-up down here at the bottom. It asks you, hey, you want to add this to your home screen? If you click on that, beep, add. Yep, just automatically. And then it's here as a little icon. You click on that icon and it pulls it up like it's an app. So that's kind of the user experience that you get. It's also worth mentioning, if you don't see that prompt, there is another way to get this installed. And yeah, there it is. So if you go over to the menu, you're on your, if you say on your personal phone, you want to open this up. I'm not seeing it right now, but when I pull this up on my own phone, it says like install. There's an install button in the drop down on my mouse. I don't know if there's a problem with the emulator. It does say update Chrome, but that's where actually it might be this add to home screen. I think that's it. Yeah, so add to home screen, you can do it directly from there as well. So there's a mention there that both ways to get to it. Yep.
If I come in, so this way, like, like Google or Google Play Store or the Apple Store, you still do that on like the website?
Right. So the main way that you get a PWA installed is what I just showed. Is you either acknowledge the banner down here at the bottom, or you go to pick it from the menu. That's the main two ways that you do it. But what's happened recently, and that's where I talked about in 2019 and last year, Google has shipped a tool to make it so that you can get it onto the Play Store, right? So you can actually list it as an app on the Play Store. So you can do that now. There's not the same equivalent over on iOS, or you can take a PWA and get it into the App Store.
You think if you want to sell it for $5 a pop, you
right?
Download it and put it on your phone.
Right. So PWA doesn't do that, but what you can do, and most companies have shifted towards a kind of a free to install model anyway, and PWA really only works in that model. You do have to assume that installing it is free.
I guess on more than one occasion, I've known some app developers that they did try to charge up front. They thought, look, if I can get users to my app, then I can make way more money.
Yeah. So you can't charge up front like you can with the Play Store, but large in part, yeah, it's not worth it. Large in part, you get more money if you ask for money later. Like you say, hey, I've got to create an account, and then it's $5 a month. You're going to get more. You're actually going to get more money if you say, hey, I can use it for free. Oh, but if you pay me $5 a month, then you'll get this. That $5 a month will dwarf whatever you would have gotten up front.
I think it's taking over our society. I went to a car wash. Oh, free car washes for a week, but then you got a membership.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
If I have someone who wants to, like my kid wants to mow lawns for a living, I'm going to say, offer your lawn services for a month for free.
Yeah.
But then they automatically subscribe every week.
I think that is offering $10 for 30 tacos. I don't know exactly
Right.
So as soon as you go to 31, you got another $30.
So you do have to change the way you sell. You can't sell up front, but you can say, okay, you can pay $5 and then you get an account, right? There are a bunch of ways to still do it, but large in part, that's what your customers want anyway. So you had a hand up, Michael? Yep. It's true, because it's running actually in Chrome. You do, like, let's say you have an ad block browser. Actually, those do run in the PWA because it's still the Chrome browser, which is a good and bad thing because security problems come with that. And in advertising, that is something that I suspect could be removed. I'm going to suspect that developers will probably eventually get an option to not allow extensions in their PWAs. because that can easily be some issue. There can easily be some issues there. But I think, yeah, I think that currently is the case.
I've got to handle a few other things. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
I'll watch the rest of your recording.
No problem. Awesome.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
You too. So that's kind of the gist of it, right? So you kind of understand where it fits and how you install it. Okay? So one thing I want to show while we're here is I do want to show also, here's my, here's also the, remember we did the example application last semester, Pet Adoption Agency, and I was doing that. So this is up on Heroku, and I converted this over to a PWA. So it's got the same kind of things. There's a very important thing in terms of Chrome. I mentioned there's some new dev tools. If I go to the open up the DevTools, go to the Application tab, okay, the Application tab will tell you everything you need to know about your PWA. You can use these DevTools both locally and you can use them on Heroku, but they'll tell you a lot of these things that you need to know. So, like for instance, you can see the name of the app, the short name, you can see the description, you can see the ID of the application. I would strongly recommend using these tools as you're building your and converting things to the PWA, because it will help you sort through a lot of issues. So it will tell you all the information that is here. It's reading from the manifest. It's telling me that, hey, I have some issues with my icons, which I haven't resolved. But it's also will tell you about, like, is the service worker running or you're missing a service worker. So right now I have a service worker, so it's not complaining about it. But if I go down to the service worker, I can see the service worker running. It's already installed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So you can troubleshoot the service worker here as well. You can also have the unregister button there, which will stop the service worker running. That's how you get into and manipulate it to know if it's running and to restart it. Okay, so that's important for testing purposes. How this PWA is set up. Let's see. So there's local storage, which we looked at. Session storage. Let's go down to cache. Right. So the script that I'm going to give you is going to set this part up for you. So with React and Create React App, there's this idea of the application shell. It's what are the files at minimum that you need to start the application up. So the script that I've given you takes care of part of this already. Okay, and you can see the files that is what we call pre-cached. It cached them for later use so that this app can run offline. So we can see what files is it cached. Well, it's cached index.html, because obviously you need that to be able to load the page at all. So that's downloaded and available for offline usage. It saved some CSS, right? You might notice that this kind of looks like Bootstrap. So it saved the CSS, that's cached. There's more CSS. And there's my JavaScript files, are pre-cached, more JavaScript, and there are both of my fonts. So I'm using Open Sans and Oswald, and both of those are cached because it needs it to start the initial application. So that's one place you'll want to look, is you'll want to see what's in the cache. You'll see what's cached to make sure that it's caching the right things, like what are the things that it needs to have in order to start your application. Depending on how you write your code will change whether or not it knows about those files. Everybody clear with that? So for instance, anything you reference in an HTML file or anything you reference in directly in the CSS files, it'll know to bring those font files and image files in. So like if you have a background image, it will automatically put that into these things in the pre-caches. But for instance, I think, Zach, you had the pictures that are showing up. Those it doesn't know about because those are dynamic, right? So out of the box, those are not pre-cached, right? Your other resources like Bootstrap and React are pre-cached, but not your images, right? So oftentimes you may need to mess around with that and cache some additional things. Cool. Good. Okay, so this is a really good place to look, and this is literally this entire tab, this application tab, gives you access to everything that you want to test regarding PWA. Cool. All right, so that's an important place to look. Okay, so let's talk about what are the basic things that you need to do. So we looked at the dev tools, and you know how to find those. In order to actually convert your React application into a PWA, there are a handful of things you have to do. You need a manifest.json with updated metadata. Usually speaking, when you're building an app from scratch, let's say you're doing what you did in first semester and you're just kind of building static websites, that obviously won't be there. You'd need to create it from scratch. But because we built these with React, that Create React app, that tool goes ahead and generates a manifest for you. So the good news is for the projects that you're working on, all you've got to do is just change a little bit of metadata to make this work. Similarly, there's some metadata at the top of all of your pages. That also is important, both from search engines and for the PWA purposes. Oftentimes, you put a lot of the same information between both your manifest and your index. Oftentimes, those will both have the same pieces of information. So any changes that you make to the manifest are generally going to mean you have to change something in index. Anything you change in index may mean that you may need to change it in the manifest. So be careful to keep those things the same. Cool. So we can look at what some of those files look like. So I'm going to pull up my kind of completed version of the React of the pet adoption agency, and we can see what some of the things are that we did. So looking in the manifest, and these things are spelled out more in the lab, so just you'll get a refresher there. But I had to do things like up here, you'll notice that I changed the ID. I changed the ID to Paul Smith's KC /pet adoption. And if I look in the dev tools, that appears right here under the application ID. It's the URL plus that ID. So that's where it goes. It basically identifies that app. Okay. There's a name and there's a short name. I think actually from my experience after having used these, I think I need to fix that because I originally had both of those being pretty long. So I'm going to go back to this being the description. The theory is that short name and name are kind of used interchangeably, and it uses whichever one fits. But I have not had great luck with having it figure out the right one to use. So I would actually really recommend whatever you set for short name and name, I would recommend setting the same thing in both places, honestly, because it just doesn't really pick it as well as I would like based on the length of saying, hey, how much space is there available? It's not really good at figuring out which it is. So your description would be the same that you would put on the meta description for the website. Think about like what would you want to show up in the Google search result? Like that description you should put here in this description and the meta description in your HTML. Okay. Next up, we have some icons. We always need to have a .ico file for Windows. Windows really wants an icon named with favicon.ico. No other name. It needs to be that name. Windows really wants that. This is largely only used on Windows. It's kind of got a weird type. See image/x icon, but it's got to be that. It can't be like image PNG. It has to be image x icon. Okay. They've also got listed in here what sizes this supports. So according to this, it's saying 64, 32, 24, and 16. That's saying what sizes can this icon be used in? What does it support? That you may have to shift based on what's actually in your icon. So like mine, I think, was complaining that on the favicon.ico, you see and say, well, the actual size of this is actually 64, but it's saying that it can be used as 32 and 24 and 16. So if I was going to get rid of that error, I would say just 64. Now, the reason that they have that in there in the template, because this is not something I changed, it was already there, is basically because .icos actually contain a few different sizes. The .ico files are typically not just one size. Usually inside of an ICO file, you can actually have multiple copies of the same icon, which actually does make them pretty big in some cases. Cool. So that's one thing you do have to have. Make sure that's in there. You also have to have, per Google's requirements, you have to have an image that's 192 by 192 and another one that's 512 by 512. Those both have to be PNGs. So these are the minimum icons that you have to have. Typically, I would add in a 16 by 16 and a 32 by 32 PNG as well. Cool. But that is the bare minimum that is what you'll see if you're starting from your project from scratch. What I would recommend, so this one does have to be favicon.ico. These can actually be whatever you want to name them, but I would actually recommend keeping those same names that Create React App does out of the box, where they're logo 192, logo 512, logo 64, etc. I would recommend keeping that same name because it actually is a pretty good naming scheme. And it's not, some people will put like the name of the site in there. I'd say large in part it's not preferable to put the name of the site in there. It's just better to just say logo. So, other few settings that are in here, start URL. This says where is it going to start. So effectively here it's kind of starting at the root of your application. That you don't need to change. Like that, this definitely, assuming you're working with Create React App, you're just going to leave it as dot. If you're building this with some other technologies or you have some different requirements, then you might change that. But for React, you're definitely going to leave that as is. Display changes how it appears. Standalone says that it should appear basically as an app with no additional decorations in there. If you looked and paid close attention to the app I showed here, this one is not in standalone mode because there's an address bar at the top. So the standalone mode removes that, but I wanted that for this particular app mainly because that's kind of how I get to the admin screen and such. So I have a working address bar and such up here. But that's what that changes. Display changes how the top of your application looks. Okay. Theme color. Theme color is a very interesting one. Theme color does not behave the way I would expect it to. Does anybody remember what the theme color does from the reading and playing around with it? I told this to a few people yesterday. What does the theme color affect?
I noticed it kind of like looks like the banner up at the top. That color.
So which banner?
Like on my app, it was. I mean, it was just up near the top. I guess really wasn't on far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had a hand up?
It was supposed to be the very top application bar.
It's the very, very top. Okay. And it's not the application bar because this part here is the application bar. Okay. It's the very top, which we know is the status bar on Android. So that top part on Android is called the status bar. So it changes the color of the status bar. So, and the reason I've set it to that color would be to try and transition that. Well, actually, it's interesting because that, oh, I'm looking at a different app. That's why. So that's a different color. Yeah. So if I set this as black, which I think is the default, then that status bar is going to be black. I would generally recommend most of your websites will have a nav bar I would try to make that status bar color the same color as what's in your download. That way it's going to flow, transition smoothly, because your status bar is your navigation bar at the top is basically going to go where the application bar would go. So we generally want to keep those close, if not exactly the same. Sometimes we'll do a little bit change in brightness or have it be a little bit darker, a little bit lighter. But yeah. And then background color is kind of what it says. Background color is the default, is your background color. And that gets used here. If I remember right, when I launch this app, you'll see how it's loading in. That background color as it's loading in, that's where that gets applied. So it affects the loading screen as you're loading in your app. So that's the thing to pay attention to there. Let me see, is there anything, what were the other things that we had mentioned? So on the lab, I mentioned the manifest. So we talked about the ID, talked about the short name, the description. We talked about the icons, your theme color. Oh, and by the way, there's also an orientation. You probably will not need to set this. If you don't set the orientation, it's just supported in any orientation. The app works in any orientation. So I think if I turn this one sideways, it should go sideways. There it goes. So if I set the orientation to just be portrait, then this would stay portrait here. Or if I set it to landscape, then it would only be allowed in landscape. So you can use the orientation if you want to limit which orientations are allowed. Okay, but by default, it just uses the gyroscope to figure out which orientation to use. So that you can use as a limiter if you do find that you only want it available in some orientations. The next thing you want to do, as I mentioned, your manifest and your index.html, both of those should be pretty close. Both, what's there should be the same. So if we look at what's over here, I've got a few things that are important. So I've got a reference on line 5 that points to my favicon.ico. That's built in there by default. That comes in there. I generally wouldn't want to change that. Do make sure that you keep this line, the viewport, because that part is important for it working on mobile at the right scale. So do make sure that you don't get rid of that. I don't mention that in the instructions because I'm assuming you're doing this piece by piece, changing line by line, which you really do need to, but make sure that you don't lose that line because it is really important for it working on mobile. You see I'll have the theme color. Theme color is the same as what it is in the manifest. Color scheme is a little bit different. Color scheme says what color scheme does your application prefer, and that's basically tying in with the operating system. So like on Android right now, you can either set the operating system to dark or you can set it to light. And if you say dark light, like I've said here, then I'm saying that my application prefers being in a dark color scheme. So we'll try to, the Chrome will switch into its dark mode if you go to this website. But it says also, hey, if your Android device is older and it doesn't support dark mode, you can still use me in light mode. So that's what it says. The other option you can put in here is if you say only light, then this app will only be run in a light mode. So if the user's got dark mode set in their operating system, when they go to this website, it will be Chrome will switch over to light mode. So I would recommend using only light if you've got a light color scheme, using dark light if you have a dark color scheme. Cool, and that's kind of spelled out in the lab. Apple Touch icon, this is the main icon that Apple uses. So assuming that you can get the PWA support at all there, from everything I read, this is the main one that they want. But Michael, we were not fully able to get it to work anyway. But from everything I've read, that's the main thing moving forward. their icon there. It's worth mentioning that Apple can't read ICO files. They can only read PNG files. So you do need to provide PNG files for Apple instead of ICOs. You'll also see there's a reference to the manifest. That needs to be there, and that needs to say exactly as it is. Because it's pointing to, hey, where is it? It's in the public folder. It's called manifest.json, and that needs to say. So you don't need to make any change there, but you do want to make a change to both of these things. The title and the meta, those are things that you're going to change to be reflecting the name and the description of your app. It's worth mentioning that good SEO practices actually dictate that both the title and the meta description should be different for every page. If you want Google to pick these up and do good and be able to optimize and get all your pages into the search engine, every page needs to have a different title and description. Cool. That's not important for it being a PWA. These are really ignored when you're running it as a native app, once you've installed it. But as far as the web app is concerned, it's really important that those typically should be different from page to page to page. We didn't go through how to do that in third semester, but it's something you can look up pretty quickly and figure out how to do with just some minor changes. Cool. Large in part, you can basically do it with UseEffect, which we did cover how to use UseEffect to change things. But you can use that to change the page title and the page description. Okay, it also ties into Next.js as part of that too. So there's some instructions about what you need to change in the title. All of this comes down to metadata. So just changing the manifest and changing the index. HTML is metadata. Overall, that's not a big deal because it's stuff you need to do for SEO anyway. Like there's a bunch of other reasons why you want to do these changes into the index and the manifest. Even if you're not trying to ship a PWA, I really recommend making those changes. Cool? Because a lot of it affects browsers in and of themselves. But you do need it for PWA. So let's talk about the icons, right? So you saw that both in the index HTML and in the manifest that you need some icons. And you need a few different variations of those icons. What variations you need varies a lot, and I've heard a bazillion different answers. Everybody's got their own take of what's needed. What is needed for sure, everybody agrees you need an ICO. Everybody agrees you need a 512 and a 192 because these two are defined by Google. Google said you need both of those officially for the PWA. And then the ICO is absolutely needed for Windows. Windows prefers that. A lot of versions, like if you're using an older version of IE is going to go for the ICO for sure. So those top three are a must. But these other ones are things that I've mostly pulled out of, like, hey, some of these, most of the favicon generators do generate a 32 and a 16 size PNG, which makes sense because large in part, most operating systems use those. Like the icons traditionally that show up on your desktop is usually 32-bit by 32-bit. 32 pixel by 32 pixel, and usually an icon that shows up in the status bar, like where these favicons are. This is usually 16 by 16. So it's good practice to give a version of both of those in a PNG format because those are so common, such common sizes. And they're a good fallback. Cool? Especially for things that don't support ICO. Then they can fall back to those two. Cool? Good? Okay, so those are the different variations that we need. It's important that all of those icons need to be square, and they have to have exactly the size as specified. There's no wiggle room on this. You can't have a 30 by 30 pixel image. It has to be 32 by 32 exactly. That's kind of important because, especially because not all editors and all tools that you work with will necessarily give you that flexibility. Some will add or subtract a pixel, and that can cause you problems. Cool? Is everybody good with that? So it's really important that they're exactly there. And that often means if you get, say, an image online, you're probably going to have to edit it a little bit because it may not be exactly square. It might be like 16 by 32, That's going to be a problem. So oftentimes I have to, even if I find one online, I have to edit one. And then I would recommend using all the names, the names exactly as I've specified them. So how do we get these icons, right? I think a few of you were working through getting icons yesterday and kind of figured this out yourself and worked through it, but I wanted to make sure that I have a chance to kind of give everybody that same information about how to get there. Okay, so there are basically two places you can start. You can either start by making the icon from scratch yourself, or you can use an icon that somebody else has started to design, right? Usually, regardless of how I get that, I'm generally going to have to pull it into an image editor to fix it. Okay, everybody good with that? Right? So let's say I go down the route where I'm going to go find an icon that exists. It's important to ideally the icon you find should be 512 by 512. It's worth mentioning that scaling things down usually doesn't cause any blurriness or any problems, but if you're finding an icon that's already at 32 by 32, it will not work. It will not work because you can't scale icons up. If you're finding a PNG file that's less than 512 by 512, it's not going to work. Just go keep looking for something else. So make sure you're starting, if you're starting with a PNG, start it at 512 by 512 or larger, but preferably 512 by 512. If you can find it as an SVG image is preferable because the SVG works at absolutely any size. In fact, if you just have a single SVG, you have all of these different variations already. In fact, if you want to make the native Android app, one of the things we do need to talk about is how to use icons in the native Android app. Android does prefer SVGs today. In fact, they're supported natively. So it's preferable if you can find an SVG over a PNG. Cool? All right. So when you're looking online, I would say it's better if you can find an SVG over that. But I'm gonna look at what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of walk through the process of finding an icon for my app and then going to modify it in Inkscape. Okay. So first things first, let's go find an icon out there. So maybe I go to Flat Icon. The reason I use this is because they've got a lot of high quality ones and large in part they're free. They generally do require attribution, but that's kind of besides the point here. So let's say I want to go find pet. See, type in pets, it's going to give me some results. I do want to mention real quickly here, there's a few things that come up on their website. These icons, you see it says Adobe Stock up there, those aren't free. Those you have to pay for. These are the ones that are free. That up here, this is just a large ad, is all that is. So I could say, okay, I look for pets, I want to find one of these icons. It's worth mentioning that if you pick something that's strictly black, it's not going to work in a dark color scheme because it's going to be invisible. If you pick something that's white, it's not going to work in a light color scheme. So it's usually preferable that you find something that has color because color will work in both dark and light. Cool? Okay, so I'm going to grab this one because it's got color. There is an option here to get the SVG. Unfortunately, that version's not free, so I can't get the SVG, but I can get the PNG. There's a drop down here, so you can select different versions. So I could potentially just download all the versions I needed, right? So I could get the 512 and the 32 and the 16, but notice there's no 192, right? There's no 192. I'd have to go make that myself. Does everybody see that? So either way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the 512, and that way I can show you how to make all those versions if you don't have them. Cool? Okay, so let's go pull down the 512 version. Did it download? There it goes. Okay. So I've got dog PNG. All right. So if I go to my folder, pull this up, one thing you'll quickly notice here is there's transparency. That part's important. Make sure whatever icon you get, make sure that this outside area is transparent. You don't want a big white square or a big black square to start with. That will cause you problems. For the most part, the ones on flat icon don't have that problem, which is part of why I direct you to go there over using Google Images. If you go and start with Google Images, you will find a lot of images that aren't square, that are too small or too big, or have other things going on out here, which is why I recommend starting with some icons that are kind of designed to be used that way. Everybody good with that? So it is possible to find things on Google, but you're going to filter and look a little bit more if you're going that route. Okay. So I'm going to use this icon, and what I want to do is I want to generate a few different variations, a few different versions of it. If you're starting with this dog.png, there are kind of two tools that I use. I actually forgot to mention this here. Adobe Illustrator and Inkscape are both tools that work specifically with vector images. So they'll work with SVGs. Okay. They don't work with really raster images per se. Okay, so the distinction is a vector image includes all the instructions for how to draw it. So actually an SVG is a text file. I can actually go look at if I had an SVG, I could go look at it and it would look very much like HTML. It's actually XML. So it's code. So it contains the instructions for how to draw it, but not the actual, like, this pixel is this color. Versus raster images like PNG, say pixel 1 is this color, pixel 2 is this color, pixel 3 is this color, so it contains all that information. So 512 by 512, there's, what is that? How many thousands of pixels are in there? So calc. So 262,000 times 3, because there's 3 colors. So like there's basically in a PNG that's 512 by 512, there's inherently 786 bytes worth of information. Actually, I should have done times 4 because there's also transparency. So let me go back to this. Times 4, right, so there's 1,000,000. So there's 1,000,000 bytes of information in that PNG. It's compressed, which is why it's not 1,000,000 bytes in size, right? That's why it's not a megabyte. It should be less than a megabyte if it's compressed. Okay? Everybody good with that? Right, so that's the reason that I mentioned that is because we need different tools. So if you're working with raster images, then you can use Photoshop. Photoshop works with raster images, or you can use GIMP, right? Either of those tools will work. But what I wanted to show you Inkscape is because I wanted to actually show you how to use and work with vector graphics. So I'm going to actually, maybe I need to make one from scratch. I'm going to go make one from scratch. So I'm going to go to inkscape.org. It's a free open source program. Illustrator is the program that most people use in the industry, but it's not freely available, so I can't assume that most people have it or have experience with it. But Inkscape is one that's freely available, you can get. All right. So if you haven't already pulled Inkscape down, go ahead and go to the inkscape.org and download it. And that's going to take a minute or two to download. let's go ahead and take a quick break. We'll come back at 3 and we'll look at these icons. But go ahead and get your download started.
Oh, I think it's still, I think.
So, it's still better to watch.
Okay. Yeah. No, I don't think they were.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would go on this. That's on Tuesday. Some things have moved around, so where the number of businesses applies.
So just from a scheduling perspective, one thing in mind kind of on the calendar. So we're talking about PWA today, right? And mainly it's just a matter of like, I want to make sure you're aware this is an option, right? And you kind of heard me enumerate all the benefits. Like, I think that more than likely, if you're trying to build a mobile app, you should probably go down this route. But what we'll be doing next week, we're starting on Monday, is we'll get into Android and Java, right? And we're going to go that native route for the rest of the semester. So this is really just an exercise to get you aware of, hey, PWA is a thing, it's an option. You should really consider it instead of doing the thing we're going to do this semester, because there's enough that's happened, as I've said, to make it's like, well, you should really be aware of this. You just make sure you're aware of it, because I didn't want to do all the stuff with Java and then tell you, oh well, but really you shouldn't probably do this most of the time. But I want to make sure that you're aware of that. Cool. So next week we'll be doing Java. We'll be setting this stuff kind of behind us, and we'll be building with Android Studio. We'll start that on Monday, but this is kind of a side journey. But I think it fits well here. Cool. To kind of tie up some things. I was hoping maybe we could get into this into third semester, but we really ran out of time to do it.
So is the plan, are we going to be working on like one final project throughout the semester, or like different smaller projects? Or?
So that's a great question. I think that you probably my plan is to do a lot of smaller, we're going to do a lot more smaller projects this semester. At least for the first week, right? So the first week next week we'll be definitely doing a lot of smaller projects. And then we'll kind of slowly build it up from there. I do want to get to a larger final project, whether that be an Android version of the bug tracker or whether it's something else. I think that that's a conversation to be had, because that's one route you can go. You can say, hey, let's build the bug tracker in Android, right? Or you could build something completely different, right? So I think that's a discussion that I want to have in the coming weeks, but I don't know what that's going to look like yet. But I do want to plan for there being a larger project that we all build on. It's just, are you guys tired of the bug tracker and not want to do that and want to do something else, or do we go forward with the bug tracker for the rest of the semester? So. That's the gist of it. But yeah, I kind of want to do that same structure where everybody's kind of building on the same larger project is my plan. It's just like, well, what is that? What does that look like? The other side of things is that obviously Zach hasn't been through third semester, so he doesn't have a backend to work with, and not everybody's backends in the same place. So it needs to be not presuming that you have a finished, completed backend, which I think part of that is going to be alleviated by the fact that I think we should do the final project with Firebase, and so then nobody's starting with the partially built Firebase. That can be from scratch, but anyway. So those are details that we'll work out, but there will definitely be a lot more smaller apps than third semester was. Cool. Does that help answer that question? I'm just still working out those details still. Yeah. But I know next week they'll all be small. So I think there's about 5 lab assignments for next week, roughly 1 per day. So. So, hopefully you've downloaded Inkscape. If you haven't clicked on to run it yet, go ahead and click on it to install it. The install, there we go, should go pretty quick. I'm going to pull this, turn that off. Inkscape's already installed. Yes. And I'm just going to hit next. With all the defaults. So as I said, this is kind of a free open source tool to work with vector images, specifically with SVGs. So this is really basically the only format that Inkscape understands as SVGs. But it's one of the few free tools that you can use to work with SVGs. There actually aren't a lot of SVG editors out there. So, all right. So when this starts up, you should be under Quick Setup. I do recommend making a few changes. I think by default it starts with the default canvas looks like this. I would recommend, probably more than not, you'll probably want to switch it over to dark or dark checkerboard, probably, to make it easier to work with icons, because oftentimes we want to work and make things work with a dark theme. If you want to make things work with a night theme, it's better to start your background as dark. If you're trying to build, vice versa, if you're trying to build a light theme, you may find it easier to start with light checkered. So definitely pick that based on what kind of theme you're working with. Or you're working with a light theme or a dark theme, because changing that will help. So I'm going to go with the dark theme, dark checkerboard for me. I'm going to leave the keyboard thing as is. I would recommend changing the appearance to colorful on here. Not that it makes much difference, but that's where I'm going to be. So if you want the icons to look the same way as mine, then go over to colorful. Once we've done that, I'm going to hit save. I'm going to go to time draw. I'm going to hit new document. Okay. Now, when you start a new document here, you'll see here are the edges of the document, and here in the middle, top edge and bottom edge. If I zoom out a little bit, you'll see it there. So by default, when you start a new document in Inkscape, it will start it as basically an 8.5, 11-inch piece of paper, which is not really ideal for working with an icon. You'll notice I have this dark checkered. That's because of the thing I changed previously. Okay. So assuming you're in here, I'll show you how to change the size of the document. So you go to File. You're going to go to Document Properties. That'll pop out a window over here. Okay. Now in that window, we can change the size of the document, right? And we can even change the background color. So here, if you wanted to change it and you didn't change it previously, you can change the background color. Here I changed it to black and checkerboard. That's how you can change it if you already have a file, for instance. Over here, I want to change the units. The units start as millimeters. I'm going to change it to pixels. Okay, so you switch the units over to pixels, and then once the units are over in pixels, I'm going to make this 512 by 512. That's going to get me to that starting point of 512 pixels by 512 pixels, which is where we want to start for making our logo. Everybody good with that? So if you're making a logo in here, you want to go change those things. If you are pulling down a logo that somebody else has made, if you have an SVG, I would recommend going and changing these things to readjust the size of that logo to begin with. Cool. So whether you're starting from scratch or using something that somebody else has provided, start there by changing the size of it. Okay. Next things. Let's say, what do I want to create for this logo? Maybe I'm going to do something pretty simple. I think I'm just going to pull in a circle and toss some text on it. Right? So I'm going to go really simple for this demonstration. So I'm going to make a nice circle there. One thing you might have noticed when I pulled it in is it's not kind of making sure that it's perfectly round. If you hit the, which key is it? Yeah, if you hold Control while you're resizing it, it will make sure that it stays perfectly round. So oftentimes I'll hit Control, kind of drag it like that, move it, beep. You'll notice it came in as black, so oftentimes I have to go change the colors of things. So you can do that under here, a little paintbrush. This brings up the Fill and Stroke tab. Okay, so fill is how are you filling it in, what colors and patterns and such, and stroke is the outline. So I'm going to go under fill. I'm going to change it to a solid color, and maybe we make this a nice green. Okay, if I wanted to make it a little bit transparent, I could do that here, but I'm going to make it solid green as that, and I can change the stroke, which is the outline. So the outline, I've got this as solid fill. I'm going to go to a solid stroke, and maybe I'm going to make that a black to make it more obvious. Now, the stroke doesn't appear to be showing up right now because I need to go to the stroke style, because right now it's very thin. So I'm going to switch this over to pixels, and I'm going to say I want maybe a 8-pixel nice border. That's going to make it pop, and you should be able to see the border on it now. So sometimes I have to change the thickness as well of those strokes, but you can do all that under fill and stroke. Cool. This is where this nice thing where these SVGs really shine, because it makes it really easy to go in and tweak the colors and the stroke and etc. Versus a raster image where you can't easily go back and change some of those things. So that's a quick circle in there. I'm going to add in some text using that text tool from the left. And maybe I do PS as some quick text on there. I'm going to need to increase the size of this. So go to pixels again, and maybe I want to make this 300. Let's see if that works. So use that there. There we go. Okay. I also might want to go back to the text tool and change the font. So let's see, something like that, or what can I use? Maybe I'll do that. Okay, so I can choose the font and the size of the font, drop it in there. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to save it onto my desktop for this purposes, and I'm just going to call it logo.svg. So now I've got an SVG version of my logo. Okay, so that's 512 by 512. So if you've been following along to this point, you should have kind of the similar thing. Okay. Once you get to wanting to export it, remember this is saved as an SVG file. What format do I need for my actual files that I'm distributing? For what's in the lab assignment? What do I need for my PWA? A .ico and several .pngs, right? So one of the things I can do, because there's instructions in the SVG to draw things at every scale, I can actually generate all of the PNGs I need. So what you can do is go to File and go to Export PNG Image. That'll bring up this tab. Okay, I'm going to make sure it's set to page, so it's exporting the whole drawing. You'll see that it's set to millimeters. I need to go back over to pixels. So it's 00, 512, 512. That's going to say it's exporting the entire drawing that I have. I want to make sure that that's there. Down in the bottom here, I can actually change how big it is when I export it. So here I'm going to export it as 512 by 512. Okay. I'm going to export that as logo 512.png. PNG, and let's hit export. Cool. I can change this a little bit. 192, 192, change the name here. 192, 192, export. And let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. So if I go to my desktop, you'll find that I have these different files. So I've got an SVG version of it. There's no preview built in for Windows, so that's why I'm not seeing preview on that. But I can see there's the 512 version, and there is the 192 version. So actually, once you get an SVG, it's very easy to export all of those versions you need, as you can see. And in fact, you can see both of these versions are very clear, they're very crisp, because of all the information that's in the SVG about how to draw it. So everybody kind of good with that? About how to kind of work with those icons? One gotcha is that Inkscape can't actually generate a .ico file. So I think that if you're using Illustrator, it can. I think Illustrator can generate an export as an ICO, but Inkscape cannot do that. So what I usually find myself doing is going to this online tool, Real Favicon Generator, and I usually find myself taking that PNG file or the SVG file that I have. It'll actually take either. So I'm going to say select your favicon image. I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm going to use that logo.svg, run it through here, and this can actually generate all of those versions that you need. So if you start with a nice SVG file, this is a really good tool to try and to use, or if you start with a PNG. So this is one way to go through that process. They give you some options here about how to tweak it. I've kind of already taken care of the parts I need, so that looks pretty good. Here it kind of shows how it would look on Android. Now, sorry, not Android, this would be iOS, but I'll notice it's like, maybe I don't want that black background. So there's some options here. Use the original favicon as iOS, will fill transparent regions with black, or add a solid background to fill the transparent. So let's say we add a solid, and I could try going even to a green and play around with it there, if that's the direction where I wanted to go. So maybe go FF00 to just kind of blend it in. So I can play around with that, of how it's going to export that for Apple. I can look at, I think here it's showing social media. We've got, and for Chrome, so Chrome is showing up this way. That's fine. That's the way I want it. Metro, you can see that's here. That would be if it was here in your start menu. It's like that's how you want the icons to appear. So you can have that appear different ways. I could go change this to green if I wanted to, etc. So maybe change that over to green. Mac OS, where is it showing up? It looks like it's not showing up properly there. Oh, there it is. Turn picture into a monochrome icon. That seems to be the best one for me for this one. Theme color. Let's make that green. Although, let me push that down. There. Okay. So, favicon generator options. Yes. Okay, there we go. So you can tweak it around a little bit before you generate it, but this is oftentimes a very helpful tool to take you from the source image and get to all the different variations that you need, including that .ico file. This will generate when it's done. Getting the icons, I think, is oftentimes one of the harder parts to do in this whole process, compared to doing all the other parts, because coding it, the coding changes are very, very simple. But oftentimes these icons can cause some additional headaches in trying to work with image editors and figure all that out. And oftentimes, because you're working with a designer, you may have to just tell them, hey, I want a 512 by 512 PNG, then I'll do the rest of the conversion yourself. Because oftentimes it may be just easiest to do this part. So while we may not be necessarily designers, we may often find ourselves doing some of these conversions and working with images in our process. So I downloaded that package. It did give me some example code. I ignore the example code, but it will give me all of these different variations. So if we look at what I got out of that, I just gave it the 512 by 512 SVG. Was able to give me all of these different PNG files in the different sizes, as well as the value file. So large in part, I'll just take those and bring it out back in the packages, rename it, etc. So that's basically how we get to the images. Any questions on that? Any questions still on icons as far as how that process goes? Does that help to see a little bit of how to see things in Inkscape? So you can play around with things, move things around. Questions? Okay. So let's talk about what we need to do, which is the last step, is the service worker. Okay. So the last thing that you need in order for you to ship your app as an SVG, ship your app as a PWA, and for it to be able to be installed on your user's computer, is you have to provide a service worker. Okay. Now, as I said, writing those service workers from scratch is hard. So I use a tool called Workbox, which is provided by Google. Let me show you real quick the 2 code changes I had to make. So one of the code changes you want to make is you want to add into your index.html or index.js. This is where React boots up and starts up. You can either put it here in the middle as I have, or you can put it after the report vitals. It doesn't really matter where it goes, as long as it's after the stuff with it's setting up the DOM, right? So it can really be anywhere in this file. So let's talk a little bit about what it's doing, okay? Because I've given you some of this code. You probably copied it in, but maybe you don't know what all it's doing yet, okay? So let's talk from top to bottom and talk about what this code is doing. So first thing I do, I say if navigator.serviceWorker. Well, what that's doing is saying, does this browser support service workers? If this is false, then none of the rest of the code happens and it just runs normally. So if you were running this, say, on IE or other older routers that don't support service workers, this code is going to be bypassed. Is everybody clear with that? That's what that's about. Because I'm just saying, if it's falsy, don't proceed, right? But browsers that support it, it will be treated. Okay. So that's what we're doing, and that's the progressive enhancement. We say, okay, don't even use a support service worker if you don't support it. If they do support it, the next thing I do is I say window.add-event-listener load. So remember, add-event-listener says this is the vanilla JavaScript way of saying, hey, I want to register a listener for when something happens, right? And so specifically, I'm waiting for when the document loads. Is everybody clear with that? So that means the rest of this code isn't going to kick off until your entire page is loaded. That, depending on your application, might be too long to wait, or it might be just fine, but recognize that that can be pretty long because window load doesn't get fired until all of the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, icons, fonts, everything has to be downloaded and the page has to be fully rendered. So this can be, depending on your page, might be 30 seconds to a few minutes before that event fires. Everybody cool with that? That's fine. That's what we want. Because what we want to do is we don't want to inject the service worker until it's had a chance to do that initial load. So the initial load happens when the user first visits your website is going to happen without the service worker. That's okay. Everybody clear with that? That's what I'm trying to accomplish. Trying to let the first load go in without the service worker. Okay. From there, I'm saying if the production process that we do that node n is equal to production. Okay. So I'm saying if it's production, do one thing. If it's development, do another thing. Production happens when I build the resources. If I build your React app, turn it in, do the bundling process, and then serve those files up, that will be in production. But if I'm doing the local test, right? So like if we do npm start, npm start's actually running in the dev environment, so it's going to go to 0. So when you're testing locally with npm start, it's going to be using the second pathway, versus when we push it up to Heroku, it's going to be using the pathway above. Is everybody clear with that? That's one thing to be, just make sure that you're aware of. Part of the reason for that is that the local install with Create React App doesn't know how to dynamically do the hot swapping with the service worker in place. Okay, so there actually has to be a build that happens in order for the service worker to be built. Cool? Okay. So if we're in production, we're going to say navigator.serviceworker.register. It says, okay, take this file. It's in the public folder called serviceworker.js and run it. We're going to register that service worker and it's going to run it from there. If we're running in development, we're going to say, okay, we'll wait until it's ready. If there is one already registered, this is actually unregistering one. So the way this code is set up, if you're running locally in development, it's going to uninstall the service worker that is there. That's mainly for if you're switching from one application to another, where one might have it running locally, you make sure it's gone. So we're not running an old service worker versus we install a new one. Okay, and this is actually, remember how I said updates are kind of seamless? When you push out a new version of your code, it gets a new version. That's the magic, is you register a new service worker and all of a sudden you're in a new service worker. That's all it takes in terms of updates for you. It's literally just this register basically, for the most part. There's more to it, but largely.
So whenever you push the code, it
Yep.
updates the PDB that's already installed on your
Yep.
device.
Basically, yeah. So when the user visits the website or they start up the app, it's going to go run this code. It's going to go register, and at this point, it has the opportunity to go out to the internet if the internet's connected and pull down a new service worker. And so that new service worker will get a chance to inject and run its new things. Okay. So what is a service worker? Remember from the reading or playing around with it, any idea what a service worker is? So we've got the idea that if we're in production, it's using it and installing it, and otherwise it's uninstalling. So a little bit of background. So worker, anytime you hear worker, we're generally referring to a background thread, right? So there's the main thread in your JavaScript in your front end that runs all the events for the user clicking and typing buttons on the keyboard, etc., interacting with the keyboard, interacting with your app. And normally that's the only thread you have access to. JavaScript now has access to worker threads, which you can tell them to go do things in the background and not interrupt the flow of what's happening on screen. So these are run in a completely separate thread. Okay, so that means a service worker that we're starting up is in another thread. It's not in the main thread. It's running in the background, and it doesn't have access to, for instance, the DOM or the window and other things like that you might be familiar with. So, or things like jQuery. You can't get access to jQuery from that background thing. The only way for them to communicate is the main thread and the background thread can send messages back and forth to each other. So you can send a message from the front end to the back end, or from the worker thread back to the front end. So basically the way this works is the service worker responds to events that happen, right? Events that happen as you're requesting new resources. So it actually injects itself and says, anytime you want to download a new file, it gets notified. So if I want to download an HTML file, a CSS file, JavaScript file, font file, images, whatever, that request goes through the service worker. Okay, so it allows you to capture those events anytime you're asking for a new resource. So everybody clear with that? So that's the whole point of the service worker, is it gets events for when you're requesting a resource. Okay. So what can the service worker do? When the service worker gets those events, it can decide how to handle that request, right? So by default, what happens in your browser? Well, in your browser, by default, it's normally going to go out to the network and try to get the updated file, get the latest file. That's normally what happens. Sometimes it may go out to your HTTP cache, as we might say. Your browser's got kind of a cache of files it's downloaded. So it might go check that and say, hey, let me see if that font file's there in the cache, and otherwise I'm going to go download it from the internet. That's normally what happens. So what happens with our service workers is we add another layer, right? So what we essentially have today is we have, anytime the user makes a request, it goes through the service worker. That often will get passed down to the HTTP cache. That will often get passed down to potentially a CDN if you have a CDN. And then finally to your backend, the backend server, which might send it back, right? So modern apps have kind of all of these layers. So the CDN is kind of caching you're setting up in front of your app. We didn't do that in third semester, but it is often the thing that happens. So you might be serving up static content here, which can be sent back without bothering the server. So if you need like a CSS file or font, this might serve it back up. If you have, say, an API request, that's always going to need to go all the way down here, pretty much, right? If I want to log in, I need to go all the way down to here to the server and see if my credentials are right. Okay, assuming we went all the way down there, that response gets passed up, passed up, passed up, so if it's something that can be cached, generally speaking, most GET requests get cached. Then it will be saved at these different levels. So if I ask for a font file, it has to go all the way down here. Generally speaking, the CDN is going to save a copy of that, so that next time you ask for that font, it'll come back and just pull it from the CDN. Similarly, the HTTP cache that's built into the browser, that's always there, will save a copy of that font so you don't have to go download it again. Cool. And then finally up here, we get to decide what to do. So what can we do with the service worker? Large in part, we get to choose, do you want to go look at and pull that file from cache, or do you want to go pull it from the network, right? So we can say, okay, you asked for my cool font.ttf, and I'll just, oh, I've already got that, I'll pull that from the cache, okay? Or I can say, oh, well, it's, okay, you want that? Let's go to the server, let's go to the network and try to get it. Okay, so that's basically the two choices that your service worker gets to make for any file that you ask for, large in part. Cool? Anybody good with that? Now we can get more granular than that. There's some additional strategies that we can oftentimes use with Workbox. Some of them are cache only, network only, cache first, and network first. Okay. If we set up a route, if we set up to say do cache only, we're saying respond to that with what's in the cache, and otherwise just say we can't find it. Okay. If we say network only, we completely ignore what's in the cache and just go straight to the network. That would be good for things like an API request. We say, oh, we can't go, we're not going to find anything in the cache for a login request, just go straight to the network, which actually is what happens by default. By default, if you don't tell it to do anything different, it will always make a network request, which also means that things don't work offline, right? Because it can't access, if you're offline, then all network requests fail. So it's important for offline working that some of your files have to be cached. Does that make sense? What makes your offline work is that you cache some of the files that you need. Okay? So we can also do cache first. Cache first says go check the cache to see if it's there first. And if not, then go to the network and try to get it. Cache first is really great for files that don't change frequently, right? So if we've got fonts or images, or HTML files, CSS files, JavaScript, a lot of those files don't change regularly. So we might want to say cache first. Clear with that? If it's a thing that doesn't change regularly, we'll often call it cache first. If it's something that changes often, then we might say network first, right? And network first says go get it to the network, and if you try to get it there immediately, if you fail and you can't get it from the network, then you have the option to go back and follow it from the cache. That's better if it changes frequently and you're okay with sometimes serving up stale data, because again, sometimes it'll serve up stale data from there. Versus like if it always has to be up to date, then you say network only. So you largely have kind of 3 tiers that most of your resources will fit into. Is network only, is things that you absolutely need to have up to date. I don't ever want to use something stale. That would be something like logging in or updating a record or deleting a record, etc. Those actions I don't want to use a cached response ever for. Network first, if most of the time I want it fresh, but I can live with having it sometimes stale, that would be things where like I want to get the articles, right? It's maybe the latest articles. I want to go get the latest articles, but if I'm offline, then I'm okay with serving the articles from last time you were in the app. And then cache first would be the case where, again, it's files that basically don't change hardly ever, like font files. It's just like, okay, just use that file. We might give an expiration date where we might say, well, keep that around for a month or keep it around for a day and then go get a new one. So largely we want to make sure that these do expire. You can do that pretty easily with Workbox. But those are your kind of the main tiers. The other option you have is something called pre-caching. And this is one you have to be careful with. Pre-caching, you want to be very limited on what you choose. But it is an important part of your system. In fact, some of the files already here are being pre-cached. Okay, so pre-caching means when you install the app, I want to go ahead and pull all those files down immediately. Those files are being pre-cached, cached at the beginning before you ask for them, and then we'll save those indefinitely. Right? So anytime you ask for something that's been pre-cached, we don't even touch the network. We just say, pull it from the cache and immediately render it to the user. Cool? So those are the different strategies that you can use, those different levels. So let's talk about what this is doing. You've got some imports. I'll come back to that. But basically, Workbox is built into a bunch of different modules. So you can easily kind of pick and choose what parts of Workbox you want to use. It's very, very configurable that way. So for instance, they're using a little bit of code from core, some from the pre-caching module, and some from the routing module. So everybody see that up at the top? Okay. So let's look at what's happening. So the first thing that they're doing is they're writing client's claim. And what that says is when you install a new service worker, I want you to take over the work of any service worker that was previously had. That's what that's doing. So if you upgrade the service worker, switch it over from the old service worker to all the clients you're connecting to me. It's worth mentioning, service workers are not one-to-one with the tabs you have open. So for instance, if I have your website or your app open in 3 tabs, those tabs actually share one service worker. So everybody hear that? They all share one service worker. So if I'm taking over for other requests, I may be taking over for other tabs in your browser. Is everybody clear with that? It's kind of weird, but it's because it's running in the background, it can actually be serving more than one tab potentially. Okay. Next thing I'm doing is I'm calling set cache name details. That just changes the name of the caches, the name of the caches that are being used for pre-caching. So if I were to look at the DevTools, remember I showed you how to get in here. If you look under the cache storage, you'll see here's the name of my cache. It's pen adoption -precache -v2. So the prefix goes at the beginning of the name of the cache, the suffix goes at the end. Cool. So that's all that changes, is the prefix and the suffix for the cache. It's good practice to have the prefix be the name of your application. That way, two different apps don't get their caches intermingled by accident. They're still by the domain name, but this can especially be a problem when you're locally testing. Because if I'm locally testing two different apps, I don't want those two different apps to kind of intermingle their cache. So that's important for making sure your local testing works well. The suffix, I've just set to blank, but oftentimes you might set that suffix to like the version of your app you're deploying, like version 1, version 2, etc. So those are things you might have in this as the suffix. But I've started in here with a blank, just so you know that's how you can go in and change it. Next thing, so pre-caching route. This says take all the stuff that's in the manifest, take all the stuff that it has figured out. When it does the build process, it builds this object, and it figures out what are those things that you need for the shell. Like the HTML files, the JavaScript files, the CSS files, that object is dynamically generated, and that figures out what you need pre-cache. So I'm saying pre-cache all the shell stuff. That's actually what you're seeing in here. So if I look at all this stuff that has been cached, that's all from that constant. All of this stuff that's happening here and that's already been cached is from that pre-cache. Does that make sense? That's what that's about. Oh, did it turn off? I guess it did. I may have had it on for too long. And the last thing in here, let's see if it'll turn back on. My Discord stream is still running. So you got pre-cache and route. The last one in there is saying that we're doing a, if you're looking at the, actually if you look at the lab, you'll see this right now, or you can jump in the Discord screen because it will still show you Discord, the voice channel, because it'll still show you what I'm seeing on my screen. I don't know how long this is going to take to, this might not come back on because of that pop. It's probably too hot. So that last line says register route, navigation route, and then create handler bound to URL. So working from the inside out, right? So I'm going to bring this in. So just go ahead and copy that over to Discord. So what this is doing is, because we have a single page application, remember that we use the React router to do client-side routing, to do the routing on the front end. That makes this work. It makes it work for offline usage. And so what we're saying is, there it comes back. So anytime you make a request, basically for a page, direct all of those index.html, because we're doing client-side routing. And specifically here, the navigation route says if the user is navigating, so navigation means either typing something into the address bar or clicking on a link. If either of those things happen where you're navigating and changing the URL, then direct that as a JavaScript call into index.html, into your JavaScript call. And then register the route. Register route we usually use with a path to say this only applies to a particular path. But because I'm not specifying any sort of path or regular expression, it's working for everything. So this one line is what makes all your front end routing go. Everybody good with that? make sure index.html gets pre-cached, and make sure all your front-end router works. So if you didn't have an SBA, if you weren't like a single pig if you weren't using Angular or React, then you wouldn't have this line. But if you're using React, you're going to definitely have it. React and React Router, you definitely would have. Yep.
How does it know what pre-cache?
How does it know what to pre-cache? Yeah, there is. So at runs, at compile time, it generates this. Okay? At compile time, it generates that. If I remember right, so largely how it figures that out is based on what's in your code. So if I go to index.js, for instance, we can look at, it's basically going to go through all those files and see what you're referencing. So if I look through here, it says, okay, let's look at where you're importing. You're importing React, React DOM. Okay, so that's got to be part of your JavaScript file. You're importing React Router DOM, part of your JavaScript file. Or importing Bootstrap, part of your JavaScript bundle. So it'll take everything that you're importing and make it part of that bundle, okay? Whether it's JavaScript or it's CSS. So all of those, I think, are JavaScript. It's also, I'm importing a component here. So I'm importing my app component. So also go into there, and it'll import all of this stuff into the bundle. So I've got all of these things are importing JavaScript. All that becomes part of the bundle. All of these components become part of the JavaScript bundle. I've got an import for my app CSS at the top, my app Sass, that gets compiled. So it will run the Sass, compile it to CSS, include that. So all the stuff that's referenced like that, all those imports, basically that's what gets pulled in, right? So that's the first place to look at. If you've got an import there, that will end up being pre-cached. Does that make sense? Because if you're importing, you're saying, my app cannot run without this. Make sense? Does that for all of these files. Everything that's imported, it'll follow it down, descend it recursively into there. Also in the app CSS, you'll notice that in the app CSS, I referred to my font files, right? So I said, hey, I need this Open Sans font, and I also need that Oswald font. So it looks at both of those when it does the build and says, oh, you need that font? We'll pre-cache that font, right? If I had anywhere in here I said I was using an image as a background, it would also have pre-cached that image. Does that make sense? So it's looking at all your JavaScript components and all of your CSS files or Sass files to determine what to pre-cache. Does that make sense? So it largely happens automatically. The places where it doesn't happen is if I'm pulling anything from, say, the network or an array of things, or however I'm pulling that data. If I'm pulling it not from those, then it wouldn't know. Does that make sense? So like if I make a network request to the database and says, okay, give me all the top 100, give me the 10 bugs that were posted most recently, well, it can't know any images or files that would be associated with those bugs or that network request. Or give me the 10 most popular products. Well, it doesn't know what those 10 most popular products is, so it doesn't know how to get the images for those. So you would have to write your own code in there to pre-cache those product images or to cache those product images. I would generally do something like a cache first for those. Or I'd say, okay, well, we'll just let the app run and naturally go get the images, and when they're gotten, we'll save them for later, rather than having to hard code in and guess and figure that out, right? Because there's a lot of change that's going to happen. Cool. Does that kind of make sense? To kind of how to work with that. So you can look at more if you want to look at Workbox. You can figure out how to register other routes. So like you can register a route to do a cache first strategy for all of the PNG files or all the TTF files. You can add that in. You just add it in between these two lines, and it's pretty easy to configure. But this works out of the box. So that's where I wanted to give you just the minimal amount of code to get started, right? Cool. Does that help explain maybe what's going on with the code? There's really not that much to it. It's basically if you're building a React app, that's stuff you have to have. It's stuff you always want to do. But you might oftentimes have a bunch of extra code between here and here for the specific to your application about how to cache additional resources that it might not know to pre-cache or things like that. Cool. Any questions? That's really all I got today for finish up talking about how to work through PWAs. But a lot of the code in terms of doing caching, doing your offline, that all goes in here, right? Doing background sync, that goes in here. If I remember right, push notifications also become part of your service worker. So this service worker tends to grow as your application gets more complicated.
So I know, like, when we went around, we kind of did it where we built the web app first and then converted it into this.
Yeah.
Like, if you know you want to have it like this,
yeah,
your PWA, would you kind of have that in mind and like do some of that implementation? Like,
yeah, I would, like, if I want, I would, large in part, I would turn something into a PWA pretty early. I mean, the soonest point where it makes sense to really do the conversion is the point where you're going to deploy it to the internet. So, like, I wouldn't want to convert it to a PWA until I've deployed it to Heroku or anywhere else on the internet. But prior to that, you know, after that, it's like, yeah, it's definitely worth it. I would recommend doing this conversion for anything you put online, really. So that's the gist of it. Okay. So as far as what to finish up for today is finish up this PWA conversion, the PWA lab. I know some people have gone through most, if not all of it, so I can be around to kind of help troubleshoot some additional issues. But again, on Monday, we'll hit the ground running with Android Studio. That's where we're going. So you want to finish up this lab, the PWA lab today or over the weekend. I think the due date on the PWA lab is on Monday. So you have the weekend to work on it too.
So are we just pushing my code and make it turn in, I guess? And like,
yeah. So I think most of you have already added me to that. I think I've got access to everybody's repo. So I already have that access. You just have to push it up. That's it. All right, I'm going to shut down the recording here.